Chapter 4:17. Oxhead stood up and shook his head. He looked a little dizzy, but he quickly recovered. 2 puffs of hot air came out of his plate-sized nostrils. He looked at Li Daochong with bloodshot eyes and roared angrily. Then, he swung the mace in his hand and smashed it at Li Daochong. Li Daochong stood where he was and looked at Oxhead playfully, wondering what kind of move he should use to deal with it. Heavenly Thunder spell or spirit talisman? Or should he continue to use the rupturing fist? The family members standing behind Li Daochong were all shocked. And Sinuo even shouted, "Mr. Li, be careful." Li Daochong, on the other hand, looked at Sinuo and smiled at her. As for Oxhead, who was charging at him at this moment, and the huge mace that was smashing down from the sky, he didn't care at all. The family members' hearts were about to jump out of their throat. Old Gun and Bai Yi, the 2 Jin Dan cultivators, were a little surprised. They didn't know what Li Daochong was up to. Just as the huge mace was about to smash down, a pinkish-gold brilliance suddenly flashed. The red spider lily spun at high speed. Bang! The mace smashed on the huge petals of the red spider lily, making a deafening sound. Oxhead's body shook violently. His huge body was fixed in place, and cracks appeared on the mace. Black clouds overflowed from the stamen of the red spider lily and nibbled at Oxhead bit by bit. Every time they merged, the death chi on Oxhead's body would decrease. Li Daochong touched his chin and watched this scene. Fairy Zhou Rong's magical power also had a restraining effect on the underworld. The desperate expressions of the surrounding cultivators gradually eased. They thought they were going to die, but when they saw Oxhead restrained by the red spider lily, they all saw hope. Zhou Rong is so strong. Even Oxhead can't withstand her red spider lily soul attraction. A cultivator couldn't help but sigh. Zhou Rong is really condescending to stay on planet Red Sunday. Just when the cultivators thought that Zhou Rong could defeat Oxhead with this move, the beast suddenly moved. Oxhead raised his head and roared. His body, which was already huge, swelled up even more. The dark muscles on his body bulged. Oxhead's current state was a bit similar to the transformed state of the Blood Ape King that Li Daochong had fought not long ago. However, Oxhead's size didn't increase to an exaggerated extent, just a little. Oxhead's body shook, and the black clouds released by the red spider lily were actually shaken to the point that they overflowed. Oxhead fiercely swung the cracked, spiked club in his hand. With a bang, the Permetha flower's rotating flower wheel was sent flying by the heavy blow. The mace was completely shattered and fell to the ground. Puff! Zhou Rong spat out a mouthful of blood and almost fell to the ground. "Mr. Li, I'm sorry. This is all I can do." Zhou Rong did not forget to send a telepathic message to Li Daochong. Li Daochong grinned and didn't reply. He only made a gesture in Zhou Rong's direction to express his thanks. Then, Li Daochong leaped up and flew into the night sky. He floated more than 30 meters above the ground and looked down at Oxhead, who seemed to have gone crazy. After killing Oxhead, I should be able to obtain a lot of soul power. I might even be able to enter the midstage of Jin Dan. So, there's no need to hold back. The Frost Soul Origin Crystal is about to appear. I don't have time to play with a beast like you, Li Daochong said softly to himself. As he spoke, a circle of blue-gold sparks flashed in his eyes. Then, his eyes were filled with blue-gold light and shot out 2 dazzling rays of light. Oxhead was burning with anger. He stomped on the ground with his iron hoof. With a bang, the ground exploded and a crater appeared. Oxhead soared into the sky and opened his mouth, spitting out a ball of black flames. "It's the nether fire. Mr. Li, be careful. Dodge it." And Dingbang cried out. The other cultivators' hearts tightened. Whether or not Li Daochong and Zhou Rong could defeat Oxhead would determine the fate of everyone present. If Li Daochong and Zhou Rong won, everyone would escape from death. If they lost, everyone would become Oxhead's food. When they saw Oxhead spitting out Hades of flames towards Li Daochong, everyone held their breaths. They had just witnessed the power of the nether fire. Out of the 4 Jean Dan cultivators, 2 were instantly killed, 1 was severely injured, and only 1 managed to escape. Green Bamboo Elder Zhang Shou and Taoist Kongming Lu Jingtian, who had just experienced the power of the nether fire, looked regretful. Zhang Shou shook his head. "We can't dodge it." Lu Jingtian looked anxious. "Brother Zhang, do we need to help?" Zhang Shou sighed. "It's too late." Oxhead's nether fire had split into 4 balls and could still kill Jean Dan cultivators. Now that it had completely condensed into 1, its power had increased by 4 times. It could even burn a late-stage Jean Dan cultivator to death, let alone an early-stage Jean Dan cultivator. Meanwhile, the young Mr. Li had no intention of dodging. No one knew if it was because he couldn't or because he was blindly confident. In any case, he hovered in the air motionlessly, allowing the nether fire to burn him. The nether fire instantly engulfed Li Daochong. Sighs came from all around, and Sinuo couldn't believe what he saw. Mr. Li, who looked like he had the help of God, was burned to death by the nether fire? Was this a lie? And Ding Bang sat in his hover wheelchair, his expression frozen and his mind in a mess. And Monian felt like he was on a jump machine. He had just climbed to the top and saw hope, but now he fell to the bottom like he was jumping off a building. His heart felt like it had stopped beating. A hint of regret appeared on Bai's fair and delicate face. Such a monster died just like that? It was really a pity. Zhou Rong clutched her chest and also looked regretful. However, she immediately stretched out her hand, and the pinkish-gold spider lily appeared in her hand. Zhou Rong's eyes were filled with determination. She had no choice but to use that move. The red spider lily's sole guidance was the limit of Zhou Rong's current mastery. The road to the underworld mantra was a mysterious cultivation technique Zhou Rong obtained during her travels. The red spider lily's sole guidance was the first of the 3 ultimate moves. It took Zhou Rong 10 years to master it, and she had only just started cultivating the second move. The red spider lily's river of forgetfulness. Zhou Rong's eyes narrowed. Just as she was about to make a move, a muffled thunder suddenly sounded in the air. She looked up. In the air where the nether fire engulfed Mr. Li, lightning flashed in the ball of nether fire that was burning vigorously. The nether fire didn't seem to be fire anymore, but a black cloud wrapped in lightning. The cultivators didn't know what was going on, and they all had strange looks in their eyes. Boom! Another clap of thunder sounded. Clang! The lightning flashed more and more fiercely. In a short while, the nether fire was devoured. The black flames disappeared, and Mr. Li, who was wrapped in lightning, was still floating in the air, unharmed. Li Daochong's eyes turned into 2 rays of bluish-gold light. The terrifying lightning power in his eyes kept condensing. The ox head was charging at him with its mouth wide open, ready to bite down. However, the moment the nether fire disappeared, the ox head's hair shivered. It looked at Li Daochong in fear. Li Daochong's lips curled up. Heavenly Thunder Technique, Eye of Thunder Punishment. Boom! 2 bolts of lightning shot out from Li Daochong's eyes. Moo! The ox head let out a terrified cry. This cry reverted to its most primitive sound, and it was no different from an ox. The ox head's soul was trembling. Its fear of Yang Thunder was innate. The ox head wanted to escape, but it was too late. Even if it did its best to stimulate all the power of the dead souls, it forcefully spat out a mouthful of black blood and used the Stygian blood escape to escape. Once the Stygian blood escape was used, its speed could reach a terrifying speed of several miles per second. However, compared to the speed of the lightning, this was just child's play. The dark night sky was illuminated by the 2 bolts of lightning. A huge ox head's body was penetrated by the 2 bolts of lightning. The ox head only had time to let out a primitive cry before it was turned into charcoal. Even the death pill was shattered into powder. The 2 bolts of lightning pierced through the ox head's body and struck the ground like missiles. With a boom, a huge hole with a diameter of more than 1 mile appeared in the ground. It was so deep that one couldn't see how deep it was. The ground seemed to have been penetrated. Li Daochong wanted to take out the death pill to sell. However, he didn't expect that he would use too much force and turn the ox head into ashes. There wasn't a single spot on the ox head's body that was intact. As the night wind blew, the ox head turned into black ashes and disappeared. The surrounding black fog also disappeared. Li Daochong fell from the sky with a look of pity. He muttered, "Damn it, I used too much force." The surroundings were silent. All the cultivators stared blankly at Li Daochong with their eyes wide open. Their hearts were already in turmoil. Was he still King human? Not only did he become a Jin Dan cultivator at such a young age, but he could also release such terrifying spirit sun lightning. Even a peak Jin Dan cultivator might not be able to withstand that attack, unless it was yuanying. Looking at the huge bottomless hole, everyone felt a chill run down their spines. Fortunately, the location of this attack was relatively far from the grotto. Otherwise, the Frost Soul Origin crystal would have been bombarded into ashes. "Dad, is this the same Mr. Li we met on the Blue Bay Star?" And Sino stuttered. In his mind, he recalled the first time he met Li Daochong more than a year ago at the Zixiao People's Hospital on the Blue Bay Star. When the image of Li Daochong in his memory overlapped with the image of Li Daochong at this moment, and Shino couldn't tell if they were still the same person. Chapter 4:18. Beat. Killed one oxhead. Obtained soul power. Host has leveled up to level 21. After Li Daochong used the Eye of Thunder punishment, the spirit energy in his body was almost depleted. This was the first time he was facing a general-level ghost beast like Oxhead. Li Daochong didn't dare to be careless. He would go all out if he didn't attack. Li Daochong didn't hold back in this attack. The 2 bolts of thunder punishment gathered all of Li Daochong's strength. Therefore, its power was extremely shocking. Just as the other cultivators had guessed, ordinary peak Jin Dan cultivators couldn't withstand it. Only a nascent soul cultivator would be able to withstand Li Daochong's Eye of Thunder punishment, which was unleashed with all his might. This move was Li Daochong's most powerful trump card so far. At the same time, it had an additional effect on the Dark Ghost. Otherwise, Oxhead wouldn't have been killed. However, once Oxhead died, a black mist was immediately sucked into Li Daochong's body and disappeared. Li Daochong, who was almost depleted, instantly replenished the spirit energy in his body. The Jin Dan grew slightly. Without much effort, Li Daochong stepped into the middle stage of Jin Dan. According to the level calculation of the hot-blooded level-up tool, he was level 21. Li Daochong had only estimated that he might level up. When he really leveled up, he was somewhat surprised. Of course, he was more delighted. The spirit energy in his body increased by an entire level once again. The Jin Dan condensed even more, and the yuanying spirit embryo in the core began to take shape. Jin Dan's breakthrough to yuanying was the process of the Jin Dan hatching the primordial soul spirit infant. Countless cultivators were stuck at this stage, unable to advance even an inch. They didn't understand the main point until the day they died. However, for Li Daochong, there was no bottleneck at all. He only needed to kill enough ghosts. No one noticed the changes in Li Daochong's body, and they couldn't. With Li Daochong's current strength, not to mention a few Jin Dan cultivators, even if a yuanying cultivator really came, he would still be able to match them. Of course, after these days of continuous fighting, Li Daochong's equipment consumption was astonishing. Song Ink was riddled with injuries. If it did not level up, it would not be able to use it for the time being. Li Daochong had used up all of his talismans, not a single one was left. The materials for making talismans were also not very complete. Other than money and spirit stones, Li Daochong had nothing on him. Fortunately, Li Daochong had never been particularly reliant on equipment. However, as his cultivation base increased, Li Daochong increasingly felt the importance of equipment. This was the first time that Li Daochong had fought without Song ink, in a situation where the opponent was not very strong. Li Daochong still felt that something was missing, and his heart was not at ease. After everything here was settled, the first thing that Li Daochong wanted to do was to go to the North Star University's weapon refining school to find someone to repair and upgrade Song ink. Li Daochong used a shocking sacred art to kill Oxhead in front of everyone. None of the cultivators present dared to say anything. His overwhelming strength silenced everyone. The three big clans only had a few weak mortals left. When they saw the black clouds dissipate, they immediately wanted to leave. The Yi clan's patriarch, Yi Shao, escaped because his cultivation base was not high. Oxhead's targets were mainly cultivators with high cultivation bases. Yi Shao brought the few remaining Yi clan members and hurriedly disappeared into the darkness under the cover of the night. Yi Zhao's face was gloomy. What Frost Soul Origin Crystal? What #1 cultivator of the Crimson Sun planet? He had no interest in any of that. He only wanted to bring the remaining members of his clan and leave this damned place. The Yi clan had lost too much in this operation. They were almost wiped out. All the powerful cultivators in the clan were killed. Even the patriarch Yi Zhengtu was killed. The Yi clan could not stay on the Crimson Sun planet any longer. They could only sell all their assets and start anew somewhere else. Just as Yi Shao was thinking about how to leave the Crimson Sun planet as soon as possible, a faint voice came from behind him. Patriarch Yi, you still have 2.5 hours to prepare 10 million spiritual stones. Oh right, before I get the stones you better not leave my sight. Otherwise I will be very anxious. Once I am anxious, I will be very angry. Once I am angry, I will be very impulsive. Once I am impulsive, I will do some crazy things. For example, I will summon lightning to kill Oxhead and create a crater. What would happen if it landed on the Yi clan's headquarters? Patriarch Yi, I think you don't want to see me do crazy things, right? Every time Yi Shao heard a word, the sweat on his body would unconsciously flow out a little. After hearing the entire sentence, Yi Shao was like a drenched chicken, cold sweat uncontrollably pouring out. It was Mr. Li's voice. Yi Shao was first frightened. A Jin Dan cultivator who could kill Oxhead in seconds was not someone the Yi clan could afford to offend. He could easily crush the Yi clan. Yi Shao was also shocked. After going through the gates of hell, he had long forgotten about the 10 million spiritual stones. Now that it was mentioned, it was already a miracle that Yi Shao was not paralyzed with fear. Yi Shao did not dare to take another step. Trembling, he turned around and looked at Li Daochong, who had appeared 3 to 4 meters behind him. Mr. Li, you can rest assured. Since the patriarch has agreed, even if he dies, the Yi clan will follow through. Yi Shao stuttered. When the cultivators beside him heard this, they were amused. You dare to go back on your word if you don't follow through? Do you want to die? Li Daochong did not say anything else. In a flash, he disappeared from where he was. Li Daochong naturally did not care about the other members of the 3 major clans. They could go wherever they wanted, as long as they did not stay here and be an eyesore. On the side of the rogue cultivators, 2 Jin Dan cultivators died, 1 was seriously injured, and only the old Zhang Shou was left. The rest of the cultivators also silently left. Other than Zhou Rong, the other cultivators also left. With Mr. Li's terrifying power, who could compete with the Yin clan? Although the treasure was good, it was not as important as their lives. When Zhang Shou left, his eyes were filled with unwillingness, but there was nothing he could do. Not to mention Mr. Li, Old Pao and Bai Yi seemed to have recovered. With the 3 of them together, who would dare to stop them? Even the local self-cultivator army would not be able to stop them. After Li Daochong warned Yi Shao, he came to the front of the cave. The cold air inside was even colder than before. The Frost Soul Source crystal had completely appeared. It was time to take it. Li Daochong walked into the cave alone. No one dared to follow him. Even Old Gun and Bai did not dare to move after looking at each other. No one knew what kind of temper Mr. Li had. A self-cultivator of this level was probably not easy to talk to. Therefore, it was best not to provoke him. If they followed and angered Mr. Li, he could kill them with a thought. The loss would outweigh the gain. No one wanted to take the risk. Everyone tacitly watched Mr. Li walk into the cave. A few seconds later, Zhou Rong clutched her chest and ignored the strange looks from all around her. She staggered into the cave. After Zhou Rong, no one dared to move. In the cave, Li Daochong quickly walked to the end. This was the place where Li Daochong used the extreme Yin compass to seal the spatial rift a few months ago. The spatial fluctuations here had completely stabilized. There would be no more spatial rift. However, the cold air was extremely strong. It was colder than any place Li Daochong had ever been. 100 meters underground was the source of the cold air. Li Daochong reached out his hand. A cyclone formed in his palm and formed a drill. The ground in front of Li Daochong was quickly drilled open. At this moment, footsteps came from behind him. "Fairy Zhou, you've got guts. How dare you follow me in? Aren't you afraid that I'll kill you?" Li Daochong said as he drilled the hole. "Mr. Li, I don't mean you any harm. I don't want to compete with you for the Frost Soul Source Crystal. I just want to take a look and ask Mr. Li if you can give me some Frost Soul Source Crystals," Zhou Rong said in a weak voice. Zhou Rong had been badly shaken by the bull's head. She had not recovered yet. Her body was sore all over. There was still some death chi in her body. The general-level ghost beast deserved its reputation. Zhou Rong knew how strong the bull's head was. However, Mr. Li was even stronger. Because the battle had ended so quickly, it was easy to give people the illusion that the bull's head was not very strong. After Zhou Rong finished speaking, the grotto fell into silence. Li Daochong did not reply. His attention was focused on drilling the hole. The hole was about 2 meters in diameter. Because of the extreme cold air, the entire ground had turned into frozen soil. It was not easy to drill the hole. Even though Li Daochong was already in the middle stage of the core formation stage, without any ancillary magical equipment, it would still take him a long time to drill a hole 100 meters deep with only the intense swirls generated by his aura. Zhou Rong waited for a while. Seeing that Mr. Li still did not reply, she took out the pink and gold-red spider lily from her sleeve. Normally, it was a normal-sized metal flower. Mr. Li used this. Zhou Rong handed the flower to Li Daochong. Li Daochong did not stand on ceremony. He glanced at Zhou Rong, took the red spider lily, and activated it with his spirit chi. The red spider lily grew instantly. It spun at high speed and plunged into the ground. With the Dharma treasure, the speed of drilling the hole increased sharply. In a short while, Li Daochong had drilled a hole 100 meters deep. The Frost Soul Origin crystal below emitted a sparkling light. Li Daochong returned the red spider lily wheel to Zhou Rong. The latter looked at Li Daochong in surprise. Zhou Rong knew her Dharma treasure very well. Not everyone could activate the red spider lily. Although Zhou Rong had not refined the red spider lily into her natal Dharma treasure, most cultivators rejected this kind of extreme Yin attribute Dharma treasure. It would be awkward to activate and difficult to control. However, in Mr. Li's hands, the red spider lily was a walk in the park. It was quite easy to use. Li Daochong did not care about Zhou Rong's expression and thoughts. He stared at the Frost Soul Origin crystal below. He reached out his hand and a soft suction force went deep into the hole. The Frost Soul Origin crystal the size of a water tank slowly rose up. When the Frost Soul Origin crystal floated up from the hole, Zhou Rong's beautiful eyes widened in disbelief. She knew that the Frost Soul Origin crystal on the Red Sun planet was not small, but who would have thought that it would be so big? According to the records, most of the Frost Soul Origin crystals found were only the size of a fist. It could be one piece or several pieces. The largest piece was the size of a normal person's head. The size of a water tank was unprecedented. Li Daochong put down the Frost Soul Origin crystal slowly, broke a piece and threw it to Zhou Rong. Here you are. Consider it the rent for using your Dharma treasure. Zhou Rong's face was full of confusion. She held the Frost Soul Origin crystal, which was the size of 2 palms, in her hands. She never thought that Mr. Li would give her a piece for free. Zhou Rong had gone through a lot to reach the Jin Dan level. She was used to the dark side of self-cultivators who would do anything for treasures and resources. They would cheat each other and kill each other. Zhou Rong was used to it. At this moment, Mr. Li's unguarded and generous behavior was like a clear stream, but Zhou Rong was not used to it. Chapter 419. Li Daochong naturally didn't care what Zhou Rong thought. He broke off a piece and tossed it to her, then put the rest into his storage bag. Li Daochong didn't know how to use this thing. He wasn't a tool refiner, so he didn't need to know. All he needed to know was that this thing was very valuable and useful. When Li Daochong walked out of the cave, the Yin family and the cultivators didn't leave. Everyone seemed to want to see the Frost Soul Origin crystal. Anmanian immediately went up to Li Daochong when he saw him. "Mr. Li, did you get the thing?" Li Daochong nodded. He scanned his surroundings and said, "Let's go to the Yin family first." Anmanian was delighted. He immediately gave the order to return home. More than 10 luxurious flying shuttles flew over from the shadows. "Mr. Li, please." Anmanian opened the door for the first shuttle and greeted him. Li Daochong didn't stand on ceremony and got in. Yi Xiao, who was standing nearby, relaxed when he saw that Li Daochong seemed to have forgotten about him. Suddenly Yi Xiao felt a strong suction force. He slid over to the flying shuttle Li Daochong was sitting in. The door wasn't closed. Li Daochong sat inside and looked at Yi Xiao. "How's the preparation of the 10 million spirit stones coming along?" Yi Xiao looked like he was about to cry. "Mr. Li, it's almost done. It'll be ready very soon." Li Daochong nodded expressionlessly. "All right. You still have an hour and a half. Come with me. When the Yi family sends the spirit stones, they'll let you go." As soon as Li Daochong finished speaking, Anmanian tacitly ordered someone to bring Yi Xiao to the flying shuttle behind them. The Yin family's flying shuttles flew into the sky under the envious gazes of the cultivators. Old Gun and Bai Yi were also invited. Half an hour later, the Yin family had a private residence on the outskirts of Crimson Sun City. This private residence was the real main residence of the Yin family. The structure of the garden was augmented with spirit arrays, making it look like a fairyland. Li Daochong naturally had his reasons for coming to the Yin family. He knew that the Yin family wasn't having a good time recently, and it was mainly from Third Master Yin's words. Although the Third Master Yin was considered a big shot in the underworld of the Scarlet Sun planet, his influence was only limited to the ordinary people. In the eyes of the cultivators and the 4 families, Third Master Yin was just a lackey. Therefore, the Third Master Yin's knowledge of the situation was limited. This time, Li Daochong had come to the Red Sun Star to search for resources. He had some friendship with Insinuo and Ndingbang, but it wasn't that deep. Therefore, the Yin family's difficulties had nothing to do with Li Daochong. However, this time, the Yin family's situation directly affected how much money Li Daochong could get. He couldn't help but care. Li Daochong had only come to the Scarlet Sun Star to take 200,000 mid-grade spirit stones from the Third Master Yin and then leave. Since the Third Master Yin couldn't afford it, Li Daochong couldn't return empty-handed. Moreover, he had heard that a treasure had appeared, so he naturally had to make a trip. After obtaining the Frost Soul Source Crystal, Li Daochong had struck it rich. In addition, he also had the Yi family's 10 million low-grade spirit stones and 200,000 mid-grade spirit stones. It didn't matter if he didn't get them. However, Anmanian was a loyal friend. In order to take a bullet for Yi Lingchen, He was even willing to face a Jin Dan cultivator head-on. Because of this, Li Daochong changed his mind. When they arrived at the family's private residence, Anmanian immediately welcomed Li Daochong into the family hall. Old Gun and Bai were brought to another room to receive them. As for Yi Xiao, he was directly thrown into a side room and left alone. "Mr. Li, can you sell some of the Frost Soul Source crystal to the family?" Anmanian asked carefully. Almost at the same time that Anmanian asked this question, Li Daochong's expression changed drastically. A sense of death enveloped him. Li Daochong's gaze turned cold. His divine senses, which had been greatly enhanced after the upgrade, instantly collided with the sense of death. With a loud boom, the family hall shook violently. After a few seconds, everything returned to normal. Li Daochong hurriedly withdrew the sense of death. Seeing that Li Daochong didn't reply, Anmanian was worried that Mr. Li wouldn't be willing to sell the Frost Soul Source crystal when the family hall shook. Anmanian immediately realized something. When the shaking stopped, Anmanian was already sweating profusely. He asked fearfully, "Mr. Li, what's wrong?" Li Daochong was silent for a moment before he said, "Family head-on, what exactly happened in the family recently?" Anmanian didn't answer. Instead, he looked around worriedly, as if he was being watched. He didn't dare to speak. Li Daochong could tell that Anmanian was worried. He continued, "Just tell me. I chased that thing away." Anmanian sighed. He told Li Daochong everything that had happened, including some of his guesses. Li Daochong's eyes narrowed slightly. That sense of death gave him a familiar feeling. The image of the young girl in the undying soul coffin from a few months ago surfaced in his mind. Could it be that there was a spatial rift connected to the Hades on planet Crimson Sun? Otherwise, it was impossible for such a strong sense of death to appear. Low-level dark ghosts definitely couldn't release something like this. It was even stronger than a soul-catcher ghost. If not for the fact that Li Daochong was now at the mid-stage of the Jin Dan realm, he would definitely have been at a disadvantage against that sense of death. After Li Daochong repelled that sense of death, it disappeared. Li Daochong tried to track it down, but to no avail. He could only give up and turn to Anmanian. He extended his hand, and a Frost Soul Origin crystal the size of a head appeared. "Clan Leader, take this Frost Soul Origin crystal. Contact the other party tomorrow, and see if we can exchange it for Madam N," Li Daochong said directly. Looking at the Frost Soul Origin crystal, Anmanian took it with trembling hands. "Mr. Li, the family will remember your great kindness." Li Daochong waved his hand. "You're welcome, Clan Leader. I'm still waiting for the Yi family to send the spirit stones over. I won't be chatting with you for a long time." With that, Li Daochong left the clan hall and went to the room where Yi Xiao was locked up. "Clan Leader Yi, it's almost time. Where are my spirit stones?" After Yi Xiao boarded the flying shuttle, there was no way he could go back on his word. He instructed the clan's upper echelons on the spirit net to quickly prepare the spirit stones. 10 million elementary-grade spirit stones was a huge sum of money. Even for a large clan from a fourth-class cultivation planet, it was still a huge sum. It was equivalent to 20 billion Federation dollars. Fortunately, the Yi family had been doing well over the years and had plenty of money. They quickly gathered 10 million spirit stones. "Mr. Li, the spirit stones have been prepared. It's just that this place is heavily guarded and has a spirit formation, so the clan members can't find it," Yi Xiao said with a bitter expression. Li Daochong nodded and turned to leave. He soon returned with Anmanian, and the two of them brought Yi Xiao out. Under Anmonian's lead, they exited the spirit array in the mansion. A Yi family flying shuttle was flying around like a headless fly. It only descended when it saw Yi Xiao appear. 10 million elementary-grade spirit stones were stored in a storage ring. Li Daochong took the ring and checked it. A hint of a smile flashed across his eyes. These spirit stones were enough for him to buy the materials needed to craft a level 12 talisman. Yi Xiao wanted to ask Li Daochong if he could let him go now, but before he could say anything, Li Daochong had already disappeared with Anmanian. When they returned to the family mansion, Li Daochong was arranged to stay in the most luxurious suite in the mansion. This was originally reserved for the patriarch, Anmanian. Now it was being used to entertain Li Daochong. After entering the room, Li Daochong immediately entered a meditative state. He had just advanced to mid-stage Jin Dan, so he needed to stabilize his cultivation. The night passed quickly. The next day, Anmanian used his old method to contact the kidnappers. At first, Anmanian was worried that Li Daochong had blocked their surveillance last night and that the kidnappers would fly into a rage out of humiliation. After contacting them, the kidnappers' tone didn't change much. They only asked if he had the item. After receiving an affirmative answer, the kidnappers told Anmanian to go to the underground city and leave the item at the entrance of an ancient mansion. Although Anmanian didn't trust the kidnappers, he didn't dare to disobey, so he could only do as he was told. As he stood at the entrance of the ancient mansion, Anmanian felt uneasy for some reason. The hair on his back stood on end. However, there was nothing wrong with his surroundings. The temperature was normal, and the environment was normal. He was in a mossy little alley. However, the door to the mansion, which was at least several hundred years old, made Anmanian extremely fearful. After tossing the Frost Soul Origin crystal aside, Anmanian turned and fled. When he exited the alley, Anmanian turned around and glanced behind him. The Frost Soul Origin crystal he had just left was gone. Anmanian's hair stood on end. He was even more certain that the kidnappers were from the Hades. Not long after Anmanian left the alley, a young man dressed in a green martial arts robe appeared on the opposite side of the street. It was Li Daochong. Li Daochong's eyes shone with intense curiosity as he stared at the door to the old mansion at the end of the alley. In the depths of the old mansion, Li Daochong sensed an extremely familiar aura. Master Chu. Chapter 420. The door to the old house was tightly shut. Li Daochong's divine sense turned into countless threads and probed inside, carefully and slowly roaming. Just as Li Daochong was probing, a bulge in his bosom suddenly moved, and a small monkey head poked out. Li Daochong looked down. The sleeping Shabi had woken up for some reason, and it looked very excited. The little monkey had been sleeping peacefully in Li Daochong's bosom, and had not made a sound since arriving on planet Crimson Sunday. Only when Li Daochong attacked Oxhead did the Shabi react slightly, but it quickly calmed down. It seemed to know that Oxhead was not something it could deal with. This abnormal excitement could only mean one thing. The Shabi had sensed that it could capture and devour a ghost. The little monkey jumped out of Li Daochong's bosom and climbed onto his shoulder, letting out a soft hiss. A pair of nimble monkey eyes stared at the door to the old house at the end of the alley. Li Daochong reached out and patted the monkey's head. "Little guy, don't be impatient. If you like to eat that kind of thing, then just follow me. I won't let you starve." Li Daochong's words seemed to have a magical effect on the little monkey. After he finished speaking, the little guy seemed to understand and calm down. Other than the saliva at the corner of its mouth, there was not much emotion on its face. Li Daochong's divine sense threads weaved into a net and probed the old house. In fact, the old house was sealed by a strong death intent. However, this level of death intent could block Jin Dan's divine sense, but it could not block Li Daochong's divine sense, which had reached Yuanying's level. He could not even sense it. There were at least 100 dark ghosts in the old house, and most of them were at the green ghost level. There were a few malicious ghosts and one soul catcher. There were also 3 abnormal death auras. Li Daochong could not distinguish their levels. These 3 streams of death chi were neither strong nor weak. However, they were not pure death chi. In fact, they were not even death chi. Li Daochong frowned slightly. He gathered all his divine sense and formed 3 divine sense threads. But just as Li Daochong was about to concentrate on spying on these three strange death chi, his sea of consciousness suddenly shook. Li Daochong immediately retracted the three threads of spiritual force. That was close. He had almost been discovered. Li Daochong's face sank. To be able to discover his spiritual force thread, the other party's strength was unimaginable. Could it be Wu Gui? Li Daochong's heart jumped. If it really was a Wu Gui, then it would be troublesome. However, this wasn't the real problem that Li Daochong was troubled by. When he focused his detection earlier, Li Daochong sensed that one of the death auras contained spiritual energy. As for that spiritual energy, he was very sure that it belonged to Chu Qianyue. Teacher Chu was on the Red Sun planet? Could it be that she had been assimilated by the Hades? Li Daochong was very familiar with Chu Qianyue's aura. His perception couldn't be wrong. However, didn't Teacher Chu go to 13 Specter? It was impossible for her to come out of that place without 2 or 3 years. Li Daochong heard from Qian Chonghai that a trip to 13 Specter was not easy. As long as you had the strength, you could exchange for a large amount of cultivation resources from the Federation. Many powerful individual cultivators in the Federation made their fortune there and eventually became powerful beings. How did Chu Qianyue appear on planet Crimson Sun after only a few months? Li Daochong felt that something was wrong. He owed Chu Qianyue a favor. Perhaps without Chu Qianyue, Li Daochong could also achieve something with the hot-blooded upgrader, but he definitely wouldn't have grown so much in such a short time. Chu Qianyue's devilish training for Li Daochong during that period was extremely important. It strengthened his body, rapidly improved his combat skills, sharpened his spatial perception, and imperceptibly increased the speed at which he could condense his divine telekinesis. If it wasn't for that hellish training, Li Daochong would have had to rely on himself to figure things out, and it would have taken a long time. Therefore, Li Daochong being able to level up so quickly in just over a year and become a Jin Dan, Chu Qianyue's contribution couldn't go unnoticed. Perhaps she wasn't his teacher, but she was undoubtedly his guide. Li Daochong also had some special feelings for Chu Qianyue. After all, at that time, everyone around him looked down on Li Daochong. Only this frosty woman liked Li Daochong very much. Although Chu Qianyue's way of treating people was unreasonable, and she even abused them as if she had a grudge against them, Li Daochong could feel from some of the things that happened later that this extremely cold woman was quite protective of her own people. I can abuse you however I want, but as for the others, I'm sorry, you can't touch them. Whoever touches them, I'll beat them up, no matter what your background or identity is. Chu Qianyue also saved Li Daochong's life. Without Chu Qianyue, Li Daochong would have been killed when he encountered the assassin. And then there was the favor of recognizing his worth, the favor of saving his life. 2 great favors, only one of them could be repaid with his life, not to mention that Chu Qianyue had done both. Li Daochong had many shortcomings, such as being pretentious, ruthless, and even a little sinister. He didn't have many good points, but one of his few good points was that he knew how to repay kindness. Revenge for revenge, and repay kindness for kindness. Li Daochong had very clear standards for these 2 things. Whether it was revenge or repaying kindness, there was a prerequisite. You had to be strong. You had to be strong enough to take revenge and repay kindness. Without strength, there was nothing to talk about. The current Li Daochong clearly had the strength. Therefore, Li Daochong didn't hesitate at all. Since Chu Qianyue's aura was in the old house full of dark ghosts, he had to go in and take a look, regardless of whether his detection was wrong or not. At that moment, Li Daochong received a message on his wristwatch. It was from Anmonian. The other party hadn't gone back on his word and had already released Madame Un and the elders. With this, Li Daochong didn't have any more worries. Li Daochong retracted the spirit energy around him, just like a mortal. However, the Sun Jin Dan in his body was spinning violently, and the spirit energy inside was restless. Once it was released, it would erupt with unimaginable power. However, without Song ink and the talisman, Li Daochong felt that something was missing, but it was just something. Li Daochong walked straight to the end of the alley. At almost the same time, in a room deep in the old house, Chu Qianyue was wearing a black robe and holding the Frost Soul Origin crystal that an Manian had left behind. Two other people were standing next to Chu Qianyue. One was one of the four commanders of Rakshasa state, Wu Gui Intercourse, and the other was Rakshasa Wu Ho's avatar, Luo Yingsha. If Li Daochong saw this combination, he would definitely be shocked. This was because he had interacted with all three of them before. Needless to say, Chu Qianyue didn't need to be mentioned. Li Daochong had never seen Wu Gui Intercourse with his own eyes, but he had fought with him with his divine will and even killed one of his avatars. In the instant that he used his telekinesis to sense him, Li Daochong had seen the Intercourse's blurry appearance. As for Rakshasa Wu Ho and Cherry Blossom Gauze, Li Daochong had only seen them once, but that one glance was enough to make him unable to forget them for the rest of his life. Chapter 421. Due to some special restrictions, Wu Ho's Cherry Blossom Gauze was only a doppelganger. Chu Qianyue and the Intercourse were both in person. Intercourse was a noble Wu ghost among the dark ghosts. Its strength was equivalent to a Yuanying cultivator. The biggest difference between Wu ghosts and dark ghosts was their physical bodies. Dark ghosts didn't have physical bodies. They only had ghost bodies, which were commonly known as ghosts. Wu ghosts were different. They were no longer wandering ghosts. Like all the creatures in the spiritual realm, they had flesh and blood. The creatures in the spiritual realm had two types of physical bodies, the mortal body and the spirit body. The creatures in the Hades also had two types of physical bodies, the Wu body and the devil body. The Wu body was weaker than the devil body. However, the Wu body was stronger than the spirit body. The weakest Wu ghost was equivalent to a cultivator in the early stage of Yuanying cultivator. Intercourse was originally a high-level Wu ghost. Its strength was comparable to a cultivator in the late stage or even the peak stage of Yuanying. However, 1,000 years ago, when the Hades invaded the spiritual realm, Intercourse was severely injured by a human divine transformation cultivator and was almost killed. It was lucky to escape, but only its soul was left. Intercourse had been slowly recovering for more than 1,000 years. Now, the Wu body was reformed and its cultivation had recovered by more than half. However, compared to its peak, it was still much weaker. At present, it was only at the early stage of Yuanying. However, as long as it had a strong enough soul, Intercourse could recover to its peak state at any time. It was just that it hadn't met a suitable target so far. Intercourse didn't dare to go to the 13 Specter, because the divine transformation cultivator who injured it left a trace of its divine soul in the demon-subduing city. The Wu ghosts and Grand Wizard ghosts that the divine transformation cultivator came in contact with would be detected as long as they appeared on 13 Specter. The divine soul would automatically launch an attack. Intercourse couldn't even withstand a blow from the divine transformation cultivator at its peak, let alone now. Therefore, Intercourse couldn't go to the 13 Specter at all. It could only find souls to devour through other channels. At this moment, Chu Qianyue's aura was very different from when it was at Xiansong University. In fact, it was very difficult to tell whether Chu Qianyue's breath was spiritual qi or death qi, or perhaps both. But this didn't make sense, because it was impossible for death energy and spiritual energy to coexist. These two completely opposite energy attributes would cancel each other out the moment they came into contact with each other. However, this did not happen to Chu Qianyue. If one could explore Chu Qianyue's body, they would find that the aura on her body was not the fusion of spiritual aura and death aura, but another kind of aura that existed outside of the two, corpse aura. In a very small number of ancient books, there was another name for corpse qi, dead spiritual qi. It was neither death aura nor spiritual aura. Corpse chi could only be possessed by a creature that was independent of the spirit realm and the netherworld, zombies. Chu Qianyue's mother was a human being, and her father was the ancestor of sorcerer. The probability of them having a child was only 1 in a billion. However, once the offspring were born, they could only be zombies. This was different from the zombies that Li Daochong had encountered before and the zombies that were infected with zombie poison. Zombies were still dark ghosts, while zombies that were infected with zombie poison were just walking dead. To be precise, they were not zombies but zombie puppets. In the ancient cultivation era, zombies were the descendants of ancient gods and had an endless lifespan. Because they did not belong to the spirit realm or the netherworld, they were not controlled by the law and could not die. Therefore, Chu Qianyue was neither a human nor a ghost, but a zombie. In fact, during the years that Chu Qianyue grew up in the spirit realm, even she herself did not know that she was not a human being, but a zombie. Moreover, when she was in the spirit realm, Chu Qianyue's body was not stimulated, so she completely maintained the characteristics of a human being. She could also use spiritual energy, but it was not easy to use it. Chu Qianyue herself did not know this. This was also why Chu Qianyue was actually in her 60s or 70s, but her cultivation was only at the foundation establishment stage, but her appearance had never changed. It was not until Chu Qianyue came to 13 Specter and met her biological father, the ancestor of Rakshasa state, ancestor of sorcerer Xing Paoluo, that the zombie blood that had been dormant for decades was awakened by the latter. In the decades before that, Chu Qianyue cultivated desperately for only one purpose, and that was to avenge her mother. Chu Qianyue's mother was killed by her father, Xing Paoluo, but when Chu Qianyue really saw her father, she knew that with her current strength, she could not even hurt a hair of her father. This was also why Chu Qianyue had to bury the monstrous hatred deep in her heart, and even show the joy of finding her biological father in front of Xing Paoluo. Chu Qianyue would always remember how her father cruelly killed her mother, and how her mother risked her life to protect her and escape from the Hades. At that time, Chu Qianyue was still very young, only 9 years old, but the scene of her mother's death was deeply engraved in her mind. From birth to when her mother was killed, Chu Qianyue only saw her father twice after she began to remember. Both times were when she was 9 years old. The first time, her father came and left in a hurry. At that time, Chu Qianyue had just returned from outside, and the father and daughter brushed past each other. The second time was when her father came to kill her mother. Because she was still young and did not have any cultivation experience at that time, Chu Qianyue, who lived a carefree life, was not very clear about the strength of others. Therefore, she always thought that her father's strength should be comparable to the cultivators of Jindan, and always thought that her father was a ghost cultivator who sold his soul. Until a few months ago, Chu Qianyue found out that her biological father was actually a sorcerer ancestor of the Hades royal family, the king of Rakshasa state. He was equivalent to a divine transformation expert among cultivators. Not to mention the cultivators of Jindan, even the cultivators of Yuanying were just a group of ants in her father's eyes. At that moment, Chu Qianyue felt that her desire to avenge her mother for decades was ridiculous. She thought that as long as she became a cultivator of Jindan, she would be able to avenge her mother. But it turned out that everything was just her own imagination. She came to 13 Specter full of confidence when she was in the foundation establishment stage, ready to start planning her revenge plan. She was simply pitifully stupid. However, Chu Qianyue did not expect that Xing Paoluo not only did not have the slightest hostility towards her, but was also very happy, no different from other fathers who had lost their daughters, or even more excited. Xing Paoluo brought Chu Qianyue to Rakshasa state, announced to the whole Rakshasa state, and held a granddaughter recognition ceremony, did a blood test, and then appointed her as Princess Qianyue of Rakshasa state. He also gave Chu Qianyue a lot of cultivation resources, land, and an army. In Rakshasa state, besides Xing Paoluo and Wu Ho, in terms of status, Chu Qianyue was second. In Rakshasa state, Chu Qianyue was the powerful Princess Qianyue. Those sorcerer ghosts and grand wizard ghosts had to salute Chu Qianyue and call her Your Highness when they saw her. However, in the face of all this, Chu Qianyue only accepted it on the surface, but her desire for revenge was even stronger. In a short period of time, it was impossible for her to take revenge with her own strength. Even if she had a lot of resources to use now, and was also a zombie that defied the natural order, it was useless, because her father's bloodline was also noble, and his strength was unfathomable, which was beyond Chu Qianyue's understanding. Therefore, Chu Qianyue had to take the long view, and in addition to continuing to cultivate desperately, she wanted to use the power of the human race to weaken the Rakshasa state. The Shenghua Federation, which bordered the Rakshasa state, was naturally the first choice. Everything that happened on Red Sun Planet was inextricably linked to Chu Qianyue, although she hoped that the Shenghua Federation and the Rakshasa state would have a large-scale war. However, Chu Qianyue could not do it too obviously. If the higher-ups of the Rakshasa state found out, even if she was the daughter of the sorcerer ancestor, she could not escape death, because the crime of treason was the most serious crime anywhere. She could not let Xing Paoluo find out her real purpose. Originally, Chu Qianyue did not have any clue, and did not know where to start, until there was suddenly news about Wu Ho Cherry Blossom Gauze, who had been missing for 1,000 years. In the operation to rescue the Cherry Blossom Gauze, Chu Qianyue's plan was to let Wu Ho Cherry Blossom Gauze wake up on Red Sun Planet, and then control the ghost cultivators on Red Sun Planet to accidentally destroy the space crack. In this way, it would be impossible for the Cherry Blossom Gauze to return to the Hades quietly. The nether energy that would be released when she woke up would be enough to alarm the self-cultivators of the Federation and those old freak. If someone like Wu Ho appeared in the depths of the Federation, the divine transformation realm cultivators of the Shenghua Federation would immediately take action and eliminate her at all costs. Wu Ho had just woken up, and her strength was far from the peak. Even if she had slept for 1,000 years and recovered from the injuries she suffered, it was impossible for her to be at the peak as soon as she woke up. When the Cherry Blossom Gauze was besieged while she was weak, she would only fly into a rage out of humiliation, and the destruction of Red Sun Planet would be inevitable. The Shenghua Federation would certainly take revenge on the Rakshasa state. Red Sun Planet was located in the 4th ring star zone, and it was impossible for the Cherry Blossom Gauze to return to the Hades from there. She would definitely be besieged and killed by the divine transformation realm cultivators. In this way, Chu Qianyue could kill 2 birds with 1 stone. She could kill the only person in the Rakshasa state, Wu Ho, and cause the Rakshasa state to suffer a great loss. Then, the Rakshasa state would start a full-scale war with the Shenghua Federation before it fully recovered. However, Chu Qianyue did not expect that the Cherry Blossom Gauze could not fully wake up on Red Sun Planet for various reasons, and that was not the most terrible thing. The most terrible thing was that the ghost cultivator that Chu Qianyue controlled to destroy the space crack was killed. The guy who completely ruined Chu Qianyue's plan was actually her student, Li Daochong. At that time, Chu Qianyue almost lost control of herself and went through the space crack to drag Li Daochong to the Hades. Just when Chu Qianyue was gnashing her teeth in hatred, the Cherry Blossom Gauze, who had successfully returned, flew into a rage after waking up. She was determined to tear Li Daochong into pieces. It turned out that after the blood sacrifice was not completed and the Cherry Blossom Gauze was awakened, her cultivation level dropped by a whole realm, and she was only at the level of a grand wizard. If she wanted to recover to the level of Wu Ho, she had to either cultivate in the Hades for 30 years or devour the soul of a Yuanying peak stage cultivator. No matter which one it was not easy. It would either take a lot of time or take a great risk. How could the cherry blossom gauze not be angry? How could she not hate him? If she completed the blood sacrifice and returned to the Rakshasa state, she would only need to do closed-door training for a year. After that, she could launch a full-scale invasion on the Shenghua Federation. At first, Chu Qianhua thought that the cherry blossom gauze was just angry and would soon go into closed-door training. Unexpectedly, not only did the cherry blossom gauze not go into closed-door training, but she immediately began to control Red Sun Planet. Her first goal was to destroy Li Daochong. Chapter 422. In the Depths of the Ancient Residence. Empress Wu Ho, with this Frost Soul Origin Crystal, your Een Dragon Disc can be completely repaired, and you can summon a Een Dragon. Once your cultivation recovers, you can summon 3 Een Dragons at the same time. Even Soul Formation cultivators would tremble in fear. Intercourse's eyes were filled with deep reverence as he spoke with a fawning expression. In the Hades, status was clearly defined. The strong were respected, and power represented everything. If someone in a higher position was unhappy, they could crush someone in a lower position at any time. Intercourse was only a witch ghost. In front of Wu Ho, who was 2 levels higher than him, he acted like a lackey. Even though only Cherry Blossom Gauze's clone was present, Intercourse didn't dare to show any disrespect. In reality, the clone was very weak. It wasn't even as strong as Intercourse. It was about the late stage of Jindan, and it was only a ghost body formed by a strand of dead soul. It's not that easy to recover my cultivation. This Empress will definitely tear that damned human cultivator into pieces. If he hadn't ruined the blood sacrifice, this Empress wouldn't have lost her cultivation after waking up. Intercourse, don't just talk. Hurry up and think of a way to help this Empress capture 1 or 2 Yuanian cultivators for this Empress to enjoy. Cherry Blossom Gauze snorted coldly. Towards the end, she couldn't help but lick her lips with her moist red tongue. Intercourse's head shrank back slightly. He wanted to curry favor with her, but he ended up getting himself into trouble. Capture 1 or 2 Yuanian cultivators. Do you think Yuanian cultivators are bugs? You think you can capture them just because you want to? Damn it, if I were to capture Yuanian cultivators with my abilities, it would be hard to say who would be the one capturing who. Xiang Yu thought this in his heart, but he naturally didn't dare to show it on his face. He only said, "Don't worry, Empress. As long as this subordinate's cultivation advances a bit more, I will immediately go and capture 8 or 10 nascent soul cultivators for Empress." Cherry Blossom Gauze's expression was frosty. God knows how long it will take for you to improve your cultivation. If you say such nonsense again in the future, I will definitely destroy your wizard body and make you a ghost to play with for a while. Intercourse was sweating profusely at the back of his head. He was so scared that he didn't dare to speak again. He stood to the side submissively. His pair of terrifying eyes were no longer fearful, but filled with fear. Cherry Blossom Gauze turned to Chu Qianhua and asked, "Qianhua, do you have any news about the human cultivator I asked you to investigate?" Chu Qianhua, who was somewhat entranced by the Frost Soul Source Crystal, was obviously stunned for a moment. How could she not know about the person that Cherry Blossom Gauze wanted to investigate? Chu Qianhua basically knew some of the things that Li Daochong had experienced during this period of time. She had heard it all from old Qian. After Chu Qianhua left the Blue Bay Star, she kept in touch with Qian Chonghai. Basically, she would send him a forbidden sound transmission once a month. Once this kind of sound transmission was intercepted, it would immediately dissipate. If there were no obstacles, it could be transmitted no matter how far the distance was. Chu Qianhua paused for a moment before replying. "Replying to Your Highness, I'm not sure where that human cultivator is right now. However, Qianhua has collected some information about him. Quickly let this Empress take a look. What is the origin of that damned human cultivator? Cherry Blossom Gauze couldn't wait. This time, the reason why Cherry Blossom Gauze created a doppelganger and came to the Red Sun Star was to find that human cultivator. If she happened to meet him, Cherry Blossom Gauze would beat him half to death and bring him back to the Hades. Chu Qianyue handed over the information talisman that she had prepared long ago to Cherry Blossom Gauze. The information about Li Daochong on the talisman was all sorted out by Chu Qianyue after careful selection. Naturally, the part about her relationship with Li Daochong was erased. In addition, there was no movement from him in the past month. As for the remaining information, even if Chu Qianyue didn't give it to Cherry Blossom Gauze, she could quickly obtain it through other means. Cherry Blossom Gauze's soul remembrance flashed and read through all the information in the talisman. Suddenly, Cherry Blossom Gauze's expression froze. "Who is it?" A shout startled the trembling intercourse who was standing to the side. He was still worried that Wu Ho would destroy his shaman body. Chu Qianyue also revealed a puzzled expression. Intercourse and Chu Qianyue quickly reacted. The two of them immediately spread out their soul remembrance, but they didn't discover anything. Cherry Blossom Gauze felt that someone was watching her in that instant. However, that feeling disappeared as soon as it appeared. Even the powerful Cherry Blossom Gauze of the underworld soul couldn't capture any information. Intercourse, you said that a powerful psychic cultivator came to the clan. Last night, he even blocked your death consciousness's inspection. Can you perceive the strength of that person's psychic power? Cherry Blossom Gauze asked with a slight frown. Intercourse was still shocked and hurriedly replied, "Queen Wu Ho, that person's psychic power is very strange. When this subordinate touched it, I felt like I got an electric shock. However, it doesn't seem to be very strong." Electric shock? Cherry Blossom Gauze also felt a slight electric shock just now. "Someone is watching us," Cherry Blossom Gauze said coldly. Chu Qianyue's eyebrows moved slightly. Intercourse's pupils shrank, and he felt a little uneasy. He glanced outside the room unnaturally. Whoever was able to inspect in front of Wu Ho was naturally not weak. No matter what, it should be a Yuanying late-stage great cultivator. Intercourse immediately became nervous. He didn't want to meet a Yuanying late-stage great cultivator in the human territory. "Queen Wu Ho, should we retreat? The space barrier of this old house won't last much longer. Once it loosens, we'll be exposed," Intercourse said cautiously. "You're scared." Cherry Blossom Gauze looked at Intercourse with a pair of bewitching eyes that emitted a cold light. "Queen Wu Ho is wise. I'm just thinking that this is the human territory after all. Once we're exposed, I'm just a lowly general. It doesn't matter if I'm captured or killed. Queen Wu Ho's nether technique heaven-reaching avatar is unparalleled in the heavens and the earth. Naturally, you're not afraid. But Her Highness the Princess is different. Her Highness has just returned to the Hades and her cultivation is still in the growth stage. Currently, she's not strong enough to fight against a human expert. If she's captured or something happens to her, it'll be a loss for the Rakshasa state." Intercourse didn't dare to look directly at Wu Ho. He was scared to death, but he still braced himself to say those words. There was even a hint of threat in his words. Intercourse had been scared witless ever since he arrived at the Red Sun planet. He was afraid of being discovered. Within the Shenghua Federation's fourth ring starfield, there were magical equipment devices that could detect death energy everywhere. These devices only had one function. Detecting the death energy of soul catcher ghosts and above was extremely sensitive. Once discovered, the Shenghua Federation's upper-level self-cultivators would be able to sense it immediately. Those below the soul catcher ghost level were much less dangerous. Plus, the death energy was weaker, so it was impossible to install such a high density of magical equipment. Thus, they only needed to detect the death energy of soul catcher ghosts and above. Almost every bustling self-cultivator planet would have dozens of such magical equipment floating in space. They were all aimed at the planet from 360 degrees, without any blind spot. No matter how hard one tried to hide the death energy of soul-catcher ghosts and above, there was no way to completely hide it. Once exposed, they would be discovered immediately. Intercourse and Cherry Blossom Gauze had stayed on the Red Sun planet for so many days without being discovered because they hadn't taken a single step out of the old mansion. This was because they couldn't leave at all. Intercourse had bought this underground mansion several decades ago. It had always been empty. In the past few decades, it had been guarded by a few ghost cultivators. This old mansion had been set up with the coordinates of Hades. If necessary, the Hades could expend a huge amount of energy to break through space and open a spatial rift that led to the old mansion. This time, Cherry Blossom Gauze had made use of the coordinates here to set up a teleportation array and teleport over. But the price was that the Hades coordinates here would be damaged and could no longer be used in the future. Bang! Intercourse had just finished speaking when his entire body flew backward and crashed heavily into the wall. This was because the room was surrounded by a spatial barrier. Even though Intercourse had been sent flying with great force, he hadn't been able to break through the wall. "You dare threaten me?" Cherry Blossom Gauze's voice was so cold that it seemed to be able to freeze everything. Intercourse felt that 7 or 8 of his ribs had been broken. He coughed violently. Ignoring the pain, he hurriedly got up and knelt on the ground. He lowered his head and said, "Please see clearly, Your Majesty. This subordinate is speaking the truth. I have absolutely no intention of threatening Your Majesty. This subordinate would never dare to disrespect Your Majesty." "Humph!" Cherry Blossom Gauze snorted coldly. Just as she was about to speak, a loud noise came from outside. Boom! At the same time, Li Daochong swaggered to the old mansion's door and kicked it open. This kick wasn't weak. Even though Li Daochong hadn't used his full strength, an ordinary door, even one made of silver, would have been sent flying with a kick. But this dilapidated wooden door, which looked like it could collapse at any time, was actually undamaged. It had only been kicked open. Li Daochong sensed a spatial barrier around them. The door was within the spatial barrier. Thus, most of the force of his kick had been absorbed by the spatial barrier. Li Daochong didn't care. He walked straight through the open door. As soon as he entered, the old door closed with a creak. Li Daochong didn't care at all about the door closing behind him. Instead, a light smile appeared on his face. He reached out and patted the little demon monkey sitting on his shoulder. "Little guy, is there anything you like to eat?" Chapter 423. Inside the mansion was a large courtyard overgrown with weed. Inside was an open hall, but it was dark inside. It was impossible to see inside with the naked eye. Li Daochong passed through the courtyard and entered the hall. As soon as he stepped in, several black shadows rushed toward him. Li Daochong stood with his hands behind his back. He licked his lips, and his eyes flashed. He didn't move, but the little monkey sitting on his shoulder changed its usual naughty appearance. Its monkey face suddenly became ferocious, and it let out a low growl as it pounced. The Shabi was an ancient flying devil monkey that specialized in eating ghosts. The moment the little monkey pounced, its back wriggled violently. It extended a pair of fleshy wings, and its 2 monkey claws grew black nails. It grabbed the shadows and threw them into its mouth. In the blink of an eye, the shadows were eaten by the little monkey. Burp! A burp came from the little monkey's mouth. Flapping its fleshy wings, the little monkey flew into the darkness. Li Daochong unhurriedly followed behind. This old house was much larger than he had imagined. It was actually several hundred meters deep, and the width was getting narrower and narrower. The entrance was more than 35 meters wide, and it became narrower and narrower. The deepest part of the house was less than 10 meters wide. It was a long trapezoid with 25 sections. This was the first time Li Daochong had seen such a strange layout. It looked like a giant coffin. In the first 10 sections, there were more than 100 low-level dark ghosts. The small dark ghosts didn't even have a chance to resist before they were eaten by the Shabi. As Li Daochong walked forward, he could clearly hear the sound of the Shabi chewing on the dead souls. Li Daochong stroked his chin as he walked. His eyes flashed with lightning as he looked at a certain part of the darkness with interest. There, the Shabi was eating with relish. This was the first time Li Daochong had seen a dark ghost eat like this. It was like eating real food. The untouchable dead souls seemed to have a physical body in front of the Shabi, and they were eaten with great relish. Wow, that works too, Li Daochong muttered to himself. After the 10th round, dark ghosts' level began to rise. At the level of the green ghost, the Shabas were much more difficult to deal with. They could deal with one, but if 2 Shabas came, they would not be able to deal with them. However, this little thing was quite clever. When it saw that it couldn't win, it immediately returned to Li Daochong's side. The 2 green ghosts didn't know what was good for them and continued to charge forward. Li Daochong only used the pressure of his spiritual aura to shake the 2 green ghosts to the point that their souls almost scattered. The little Shabi monkey once again flew up and swallowed the 2 dying green ghosts into its stomach, revealing a satisfied expression. After eating so much, the Shabi monkey's stomach was round and its body had grown bigger. It was like a balloon that had been inflated. After eating more than 10 green ghosts, the Shabi monkey seemed to feel a little bloated, but its round little eyes were still shooting out a greedy gaze, as if it wanted to eat all the nether ghosts here. The man and the monkey traveled unimpeded. Of course, this was all because Li Daochong's strength had increased by leaps and bounds. The malicious ghosts were just playthings in front of Li Daochong. If they wanted to play with you, they could exchange a few blows. If they didn't, they could be destroyed with a wave of his hand. When Li Daochong killed the 3rd malicious ghost, the Shabi monkey let out an excited cry. It actually cupped its hands toward Li Daochong as if saying, "Master, you're too powerful. I admire you, I admire you." The Shabi monkey did not eat the 3 malicious ghosts. Li Daochong knew that this little thing's level was not high enough to eat them. Even if it ate them, it would not be able to digest them. Those green ghosts were enough for it to digest for a while. It was a pity that Li Daochong did not have any magic treasures that could store dead souls. Otherwise, he would have wiped out the souls of the 3 malicious ghosts, sealed them, and given them to the Shabi monkey to eat later. After entering the 20th step, the 3 strange auras that Li Daochong had sensed before did not appear. It was as if they did not exist. Li Daochong suspected that he had detected wrongly. Or perhaps the 3 auras were just released by some kind of creature with Hades. After sensing his aura, they ran away. But when Li Daochong stepped into the 21st step, his body suddenly shook. A terrifying aura of death enveloped him. This was the strongest aura of death that Li Daochong had ever sensed in his life. There was no other. It was even stronger than the aura of death that the coffin girl had released. It was just that this aura of death was almost exactly the same as the aura of the coffin girl, only stronger. Li Daochong felt a chill on his back and immediately became alert. Could it be the coffin girl? Just as this thought flashed through Li Daochong's mind, a faint sigh came from the darkness. In this kind of lightless darkness, hearing such a sigh, no matter how brave one was, they would have goosebumped. Immediately after, the other 2 auras also emerged. Li Daochong's pupils suddenly shrank. Although one of the auras was a little strange, it was too similar to Chu Qianyue's aura. But why did Teacher Chu's aura have the aura of death? Although there was no light around, Li Daochong had the eye of thunder punishment. Therefore, in his eyes, it was not darkness but a blue light. The stronger the aura of death, the stronger the blue light. However, Li Daochong was not very used to this kind of visual perception. Just when Li Daochong felt that he was about to see the owner of the 3 auras, the auras disappeared again. Li Daochong's face tightened and he quickened his pace to catch up. After just a few steps, he heard the crying of a girl. Woo-woo, it wasn't the kind of wailing that would make one's hair stand on end. Even in the gloomy and scary environment around, the crying was not scary at all. The crying was not loud, but it was heavier than sobbing. It was very similar to the crying of a girl squatting on the street who had been wronged. Li Daochong stopped and looked toward the direction of the sound. The sound came from a side room in front of him, and there was a flickering candlelight inside. There was someone in this damn place? Li Daochong would not believe it even if he was beaten to death. Pretending to be a ghost, I'd like to see what the hell you are. Li Daochong's mind flashed, and he immediately walked to the side room. He glanced at the ancient wooden paper window and could see the figure of a delicate girl inside. Li Daochong smiled coldly and stretched out his hand to the door of the side room. He only released a trace of spiritual qi in his hand, and the door was shaken open with a bang. The decoration in the side room was no different from the ancient mortal residence. There was an ancient bed, a square table in the middle, and a dressing table, which was the most common in ghost movies. A girl wearing a pink dress was sitting on the ground beside the bed, hugging her legs. Her delicate body was slightly trembling, and she was still crying. When the door was shaken open, the girl immediately raised her head in panic and looked at Li Daochong walking in. Her body trembled even more, and her big eyes were filled with fear. She curled up under the bed, wishing she could get under the bed. Unfortunately, the space was too small for the girl to get under. Is it finally my turn? The girl suddenly opened her mouth. Li Daochong was stunned by this question. He locked his spiritual force on the girl, but he did not feel the slightest trace of death qi. Instead, there was a weak vitality coming from the girl. Li Daochong was suddenly confused. Was there really someone in this damn place? What's your turn? Li Daochong asked casually. It's my turn to seduce people here. The girl looked at Li Daochong with a pair of big watery eyes, and her face showed confusion. Li Daochong did not answer, and just looked at the girl. After a few seconds, Li Daochong suddenly stepped forward and slapped the girl's forehead. The latter was motionless and did not respond at all. Li Daochong's palm was fast and fierce, and it suddenly stopped an inch away from the girl's head. You don't need me anymore? You want to kill me? The girl said sadly. Li Daochong still did not answer and just looked at the girl. Ghost Lord, do it. I only ask that you don't turn me into a ghost. Let me die completely. The girl's expression became stupefied. Li Daochong's spiritual force directly attacked the girl's spiritual qi. She did not lie. Is she really human? Did I make a mistake? Li Daochong was puzzled. Just as Li Daochong was hesitating, the girl's eyes suddenly flashed red, and she grabbed Li Daochong's wrist. The vitality in her body disappeared in an instant, and a huge amount of death qi came out. It was the same death qi that Li Daochong had sensed before. It was the same death qi as the girl in the coffin, but more terrifying. Damn it. Chapter 424. The girl's face blurred for a moment. When it became clear, Li Daochong's heart skipped a beat. He would never forget that pair of demonic red eyes for the rest of his life. However, Li Daochong wasn't frightened. He just didn't understand why he couldn't detect the aura of death on the girl's body. Not only did he not detect the aura of death, but he also detected life force and spiritual energy. Could creatures of the underworld also produce life force and spiritual energy? Li Daochong was very puzzled, but now was not the time to consider this question. The moment the girl grabbed his wrist, when the girl grabbed Li Daochong's hand, the Sun Jin Dan in his body instinctively erupted with powerful spiritual energy. The girl was Wu Ho's clone of cherry blossom gauze. The clone was formed from a strand of death intent, so cherry blossom gauze could change her appearance at will. Cherry blossom gauze didn't know that the person who had come was Li Daochong. She only thought that he was some powerful cultivator who had discovered the old residence. When she saw Li Daochong, she almost couldn't help but rush up and tear this human cultivator to shreds. In the end, Luo Yingsha resisted the urge to rush up and kill him. This was because she couldn't see through this cultivator, who was only a foundation establishment stage cultivator a few months ago. Cherry Blossom Gauze was very confused. If she couldn't see through him, it meant that this person's cultivation was at least at the Jin Dan stage. How could a cultivator's strength increase so much in such a short period of time? Could it be that he had hidden his strength back in the stone cave? Cherry Blossom Gauze couldn't think of any other possibility. Cherry Blossom Gauze knew that human cultivators cultivated at an extremely fast speed. They could reach the Jin Dan stage in a few years and become Yuanying in a dozen years. This was also why the Hades had been stopped by human cultivators when they had devoured more than half of the spirit realm. If not for the human cultivators, the entire spirit realm would have been devoured by the Hades long ago. If that was the case, the Hades would be unprecedentedly powerful, and could even continue to advance further. That was the real target of the Hades. But Hades had never imagined that human cultivators would be so difficult to deal with, so much so that he had almost suffered a great loss. However, he had still lost quite a bit of his vitality. So much so that he still hadn't fully recovered. Human self-cultivators were not powerful, but their growth rate was the fastest, second to none. The Hades had destroyed so many races, numbering in the tens of thousands. Among them were the insufferably arrogant giant race, desolate race, and sacred race. In ancient times, these races were called the god race by human cultivators. But these so-called divine races were completely unable to withstand a single blow in front of the underworld. Even if they had a powerful cultivator who was even more powerful than a divine transformation realm cultivator, it wouldn't be of any help. Hades, on the other hand, stopped in front of a human cultivator who was considered relatively weak in the vast spirit realm. Not only did this battle last for over 100 years, but it also damaged his vitality. Because of this, several demon masters had their vitality damaged and had no choice but to fall into a deep sleep. They had yet to wake up. The Rakshasa state was only an above-average Hades nation in Hades. The highest level was only the witch ancestor Xing Paluo, and there was no devil royal family. The witch ancestor's strength was equivalent to the peak of the divine transformation realm. But in front of the devil royal family, it was nothing. Cherry Blossom Gauze's level was basically the same as Xing Paluo's. Of course, that was when she was at her peak, but she was definitely far from it now. When Cherry Blossom Gauze sneak attacked this human cultivator and grabbed his wrist, she actually couldn't control him. The death aura that invaded her hand was all blocked, and couldn't enter the human cultivator's body at all. That wasn't all. Cherry Blossom Gauze felt a burning sensation on her palm, and a wisp of green smoke rose. If it wasn't for the fact that Cherry Blossom Gauze's divine will clone had an extremely condensed death aura, she would probably have been sent flying. Cherry Blossom Gauze wanted to let go of her hand, but it wasn't up to her. Li Daochong looked at the green smoke rising from the small pale hand that grabbed his wrist. He sniffed his nose and revealed an expression of enjoyment, saying, "What a nice smell." When Cherry Blossom Gauze heard this, her body trembled for some reason, and she actually felt a trace of fear. This feeling was somewhat similar to the feeling she had when she saw the Devil Royal family in Hades. He has the bloodline of the Devil race? When this groundless thought appeared in Cherry Blossom Gauze's mind, even she herself was shocked. That's impossible. Cherry Blossom Gauze thought in her heart and blurted out. Li Daochong didn't understand what she meant. He only thought that this girl of unknown origins in Hades was surprised by his strength. Anything is possible. Li Daochong replied playfully, and punched directly at the girl's face. He didn't have the slightest bit of pity for her pale but beautiful face. Cherry Blossom Gauze was shocked. She couldn't break free of the human cultivator's hand, so she simply gave up. Her wrist was broken and she flew backwards. Li Daochong's fist missed, and only a slender hand was left on his wrist. However, that hand quickly turned into a cloud of black smoke and disappeared. Li Daochong was just about to give chase when he felt a chill behind him. A black light shot towards him. Li Daochong felt that something was wrong, so he didn't fight it head-on. He dodged to the side and dodged the black light. The black light shot into the ground and disappeared. A slender man appeared in the room, looking at Li Daochong with a bloodthirsty look in his eyes. Intercourse exclaimed softly. He didn't expect this human cultivator to be able to dodge his sneak attack. What surprised Intercourse even more was that Cherry Blossom Gauz's clone not only didn't hurt that human cultivator at all, but also cut off one of his hands. Li Daochong had just stood still when a cold light whizzed towards him. At that moment, Li Daochong's pupils suddenly shrank. He saw Chu Qianyue. Li Daochong was stunned for a moment and narrowly dodged the cold light. The clothes on his chest were cut open, but his skin was not hurt. Li Daochong was really shocked this time. Why would Chu Qianyue attack him? And why was she in cahoots with the Netherworld race? Li Daochong looked at Chu Qianyue in surprise. Just as he was about to speak, a telepathic message sounded in his sea of consciousness. Don't say anything. Pretend you don't know me. I'll tell you later. It was a simple sentence, but the information was huge, and it brought about endless imagination. Li Daochong swallowed back his words, but his heart was a little relieved. Chu Qianyue said so. At least it meant that she wasn't in cahoots with the Netherworld race. There must be something hidden. All of a sudden, Cherry Blossom Gauze, Intercourse, and Chu Qianyue surrounded Li Daochong in the room. Kill the female ghost first, then kill the man. Chu Qianyue's telepathic message sounded again. Li Daochong remained calm, but a glimmer of light flashed in his eyes. After all, the master and disciple had been together for a period of time, and they had fought together for such a long time, so they had a tacit understanding. Intercourse, what are you waiting for? Hurry up and tell me. Catch him. I want him alive. Cherry Blossom Gauze's doppelganger, who had lost one hand, ordered through gritted teeth. Although he hated Li Daochong very much, Cherry Blossom Gauze still had a lingering fear. The doppelganger's strength was limited, so he didn't dare to get close. Intercourse naturally didn't dare to neglect Wu Ho's order. He put his hands together and murmured. A black snake appeared out of thin air and opened its mouth to bite Li Daochong. Boom! Li Daochong punched out. Spiritual energy shot out in all directions, and the black snake was directly scattered in the air. Intercourse's face changed greatly. This human cultivator was actually so rude and unreasonable. Chu Qianyue also showed a surprised look. In her impression, Li Daochong was never so powerful. Intercourse's strength was equivalent to Yuanying's initial stage. Even if he didn't use any killing moves, the power of his attack was definitely not something a Jin Dan cultivator could withstand. Li Daochong actually defeated Intercourse's attack with only one fist. Li Daochong was too curious about Chu Qianyue's situation. He just wanted to get rid of the two eyesores in front of him as soon as possible. He didn't want to waste any time. Therefore, Li Daochong used his true strength as soon as he came up. He punched out and disappeared. The next moment, he appeared behind Intercourse. He punched out again. Intercourse narrowly dodged, and his hair almost stood up in fear. Li Daochong's attack missed, and he followed it up with another punch. Psychic attacks came one after another, and Xiang Yu was exhausted from dodging. At this time, Chu Qianyue also attacked Li Daochong. However, her attack seemed to be fierce. In fact, only Li Daochong knew that the move she used was the same one they used when they practiced together. Li Daochong had long been familiar with this kind of attack. He knew how to deal with it without looking. However, after Chu Qianyue joined in, it immediately became 2 against 1, and Li Daochong was a lot more tired. Cherry Blossom Gauze moved at this time and also launched an attack. 3 against 1. Just as Cherry Blossom Gauze was performing dark witchcraft, blue-golden lightning flashed fiercely in Li Daochong's eyes. Boom. Two thunderbolts bombarded out. Chapter 425. There was no need for intercourse to warn her. Cherry Blossom Gauze knew something was wrong when the two bolts of lightning flashed. However, there was no way she could dodge the lightning. Cherry Blossom Gauze felt an unprecedented threat of death at that moment. She had never felt this way even when she was facing a soul formation stage cultivator. Boom! The eye of thunder punishment pierced through Cherry Blossom Gauze's clone. Lightning flashed. Cherry Blossom Gauze stared at Li Daochong in disbelief. On a dark dead star somewhere in the Hades, Cherry Blossom Gauze's true body let out a muffled groan. Her soul consciousness was shaken and a pained expression appeared on her pale face. In a room deep in the ancient mansion, Cherry Blossom Gauze's clone was pierced through by lightning. Lightning flashed across her delicate body. A loud smack was heard. Cherry Blossom Gauze's clone disappeared. Li Daochong had reached the midstage of the Jin Dan realm. The power of the Eye of Thunder Punishment had reached another level. This time, he was able to destroy Cherry Blossom Gauze's clone, which was close to the late stage of the Jin Dan realm. Intercourse was dumbfounded. That was Wu Ho's clone. How could it be destroyed by this human cultivator? The blue-golden lightning in Li Daochong's eyes didn't disappear. Instead, they shone even brighter. He didn't have the patience to continue fighting. He turned around and looked at Intercourse. This Rakshasa state law protector was shocked for no reason. He turned around and ran without thinking. The Yang Lightning's damage to the Nether Soul was too terrifying. Even with Yuanying's early-stage strength, Intercourse didn't dare to take it head-on. How could Li Daochong let Intercourse leave? Lightning flashed in his eyes. The Eye of Thunder Punishment. The second attack. Boom. Two more bolts of lightning shot out. This one was even thicker than the previous one. Intercourse let out a roar, and his figure instantly transformed into a giant black python. He didn't hesitate to burn his soul force and use the death ray escape technique. The speed of this escape technique was almost as fast as the speed of light, but it was extremely harmful to the body. Intercourse, one would lose a layer of skin even if they transformed into a nether beast. Intercourse didn't care about anything else in order to save his life. He directly rushed into the spatial gap at the back of the mansion. That was the passageway used to return to the Hades, but that passageway could only be opened once, and then it would disappear. Intercourse. The moment he drilled into the hole, he was struck by Ling Yang lightning. The body of the black python that was stained with lightning disappeared into the hole. Then, the hole quickly closed. Intercourse's aura completely disappeared. Intercourse, after drilling out of the hole, he was blasted more than 10 kilometers away, like a meteor smashing into a mountain in the land of death. Any of the wandering nether ghosts that came into contact with the lightning would immediately be obliterated into nothingness. A giant black python was curled up in the pit. Its body was smoking, and its skin was almost completely charred. The black python gradually shrank and turned into a human figure. Intercourse's face was black and his hair was all burnt. He looked extremely embarrassed. Huff, huff. Intercourse gasped for breath. Although he felt extremely uncomfortable, he finally saved his life. However, he couldn't get up for a while. He could only lie in the pit and slowly recover. In the side room of the mansion, the lightning in Li Daochong's eyes flickered, and it slowly disappeared after several minutes. Li Daochong only felt a wave of exhaustion. At the same time, he released the Eye of Thunder Punishment at full power, which consumed a lot of energy. Li Daochong immediately sat down cross-legged and began to adjust his aura. He didn't guard against Chu Qianyue, who was standing on the side. "Student Li, aren't you afraid that I'll kill you while you're weak?" Chu Qianyue said, trying to hide the shock in her heart. In just a few months, Li Daochong's strength had reached such a level. He had far surpassed her, his former teacher. Even Chu Qianyue, who had always been cold, couldn't hide her surprise. "If I wanted to do it, I would have done it a long time ago. Why wait until now? Teacher Chu, I haven't seen you for a few months, but you also know how to joke? Li Daochong raised his eyebrows and said. Chu Qianyue's eyes flickered, and she smiled for the first time. Li Daochong was slightly stunned. This was the first time he saw Chu Qianyue smile. Her beautiful face, which was always frozen, was charming and had a different flavor when she smiled. What are you laughing at? Li Daochong quickly calmed down and asked. Nothing, I just suddenly wanted to laugh. You didn't let me down. Instead, you gave me a big surprise. Chu Qianyue was not stingy with her praise. It's my duty as a student to live up to Teacher Chu's expectations, Li Daochong said with a smile. The student has surpassed the master. Your cultivation is now higher than mine, but you still call me Teacher Chu. I can't accept it. Chu Qianyue told the truth. Whether it was cultivators or Hades, strength was respected. Only the strong could be called teacher. A teacher for a day, a teacher for life. Teacher Chu is Dao Chang's guide. In Dao Chang's heart, you will always be my teacher. Li Daochong said sincerely. If I were a human, it wouldn't matter if you think so. Unfortunately, I'm not a human. Aren't you afraid that having me as your teacher will be detrimental to your future development? Chu Qianyue asked directly. Not a human. Li Daochong had already guessed some clues, but when Chu Qianyue said it herself, he still couldn't accept it. Yes. Chu Qianyue nodded. It doesn't matter if I'm not a human. You taught me, so you are my teacher. Li Daochong shrugged and said indifferently. There was a moment of silence. Chu Qianyue seemed to be waiting for Li Daochong to ask her questions, but the latter didn't have this intention at all. Instead, he closed his eyes and carefully adjusted his breath. Don't you have any questions to ask me? Chu Qianyue broke the silence. There's nothing to ask. No matter who you are, where you come from, or what you are, it doesn't matter. You saved my life and taught me a lot. That's enough. Li Daochong's breath gradually stabilized. He slowly opened his eyes and looked at Chu Qianyue. Then if I ask you to help me, will you help me? Chu Qianyue asked curiously. It's my duty. Li Daochong didn't even think about it. When Chu Qianyue heard such an answer, a warm current flowed through her heart. There was a trace of fluctuation in her eyes when she looked at Li Daochong. I'm the princess of the Rakshasa state. My father is the king of the Hades state, wizard ancestor Xing Paoyuo. All the dark ghosts and ghost beasts that the Shenghua Federation is fighting on the front line are all from the Rakshasa state. The Rakshasa state is just one of the many Hades empires. Its strength is above average, similar to the status of the Shenghua Federation in the spiritual world. The Rakshasa state's national policy is to swallow the entire Shenghua Federation, integrate this spiritual world into the Rakshasa state, and let all the creatures in the Federation become the food of the Rakshasa state, Chu Qianyue said simply. After that, Chu Qianyue looked directly at Li Daochong, wanting to see how he would react. However, there was no reaction. After a while, Li Daochong stood up from his cross-legged state and said slowly, and then? Chu Qianyue looked at Li Daochong in astonishment. It was one thing for this kid to not have any reaction after hearing such important news, but to ask what then? Brat, is there something wrong with your brain, or are you still the same as before? You've become stronger, but your brain is still a fool? Aren't you afraid that I'll ask you to help me deal with the human race? Chu Qianyue almost shouted. If that's the case, I'll kill you with my own hands. But I know that you won't, Li Daochong replied with certainty. Why not? Chu Qianyue showed a trace of doubt. Because you're not a dark ghost. Is that so? Then I'll let you feel the death aura on my body. Chu Qianyue's aura began to rise as she spoke. The temperature in the room kept dropping, and the death aura became more and more intense. It had reached the level of a soul catcher. Chu Qianyue's small face, which was as cold as ice, now seemed to be able to freeze the desert into a glacier. Teacher Chu, no matter how you try to hide your life force and spiritual aura, It's futile in front of me. It's impossible for creatures of the Hades to have spiritual aura. Even if they do, it's just an illusion. But the spiritual aura on your body is not an illusion, it's real. So you're not a dark ghost, at least not completely. Moreover, the death aura on your body is very strange. It's different from all the dark ghosts I've met. As for what it is, I can't tell. Li Daochong stroked his chin. Do you know about zombies? Chu Qianyue asked immediately. I see. Li Daochong immediately understood. He continued, You're a zombie? More or less. My mother is a human, and my father is the witch ancestor. They're completely different races. The probability of them producing offspring is even lower than finding a needle in the sea. Chu Qianyue nodded. Li Daochong looked pensive. This was completely different from the origin of zombies in his previous world. The reason why zombies were produced here was actually the product of the combination of creatures of the dead and creatures of the spiritual world. Zombies were soulless. Could it be that after the two souls fused, they disappeared, and the offspring born were soulless, thus becoming zombies? Li Daochong used his unlimited imagination. Suddenly, Li Daochong's telekinesis power sensed a trace of the power of dead souls. His eyes narrowed, and he shot out like lightning. In a dilapidated room opposite the room, a half-dark body soul catcher was crawling on the ground, listening to something. Li Daochong was too fast. Before the soul catcher could react, a large hand had already tightly strangled its neck. Chapter 426. The musical soul ghost was a very special type of soul catcher ghost. Its combat power was not strong, and could even be said to be weak. It was even weaker than some ferocious ghost. However, the musical soul ghost had already condensed a half-nether body, so it was classified as a soul catcher ghost. It had an extremely powerful soul. It was somewhat similar to the psyche cultivators among cultivators. Its dead soul telekinesis was extremely condensed, but it was different from the psyche cultivators. The musical soul ghost's dead soul telekinesis was not strong, but it could transmit sound waves through space. In the Hades, the musical soul ghost was a necessary servant of the Nether clan above the witch ghost. Chu Qianyue was anxious. If the conversation between her and Li Daochong was transmitted to the Rakshasa state, then her plan to provoke the Rakshasa state to attack the Shenghua Federation ahead of time would be completely ruined, and she would not be able to return to the Rakshasa state. On the surface, Xing Paoluo seemed to value and dote on his daughter, but Chu Qianyue knew very well that there were prerequisites and conditions. When she was just born, Xing Paoluo did not care about her at all. From her birth to her mother's death, Chu Qianyue only saw Xing Paoluo twice in 7 years. After decades, Xing Paoluo's attitude towards her seemed to have changed a lot. Chu Qianyue was still investigating the reason. At present, she only knew that Xing Paoluo's life was not easy. A group of grand wizard ghosts in the Rakshasa state had been doubting him for nearly 100 years. They thought that Xing Paoluo had missed many opportunities to hurt the Shenghua Federation. What Xing Paoluo needed most now was allies and the support of others. Looking at the whole Rakshasa state, his supporters were few and far between. According to Chu Qianyue's understanding of Xing Paoluo, he was very likely to create some supporters in a situation where he did not have any. Appointing her as Princess Qianyue was one of the ways to create supporters. There was nothing better than finding his long-lost daughter. Those opponents could not even find an excuse to object. In addition, Xing Paoluo had been using a lot of new people recently. Intercourse was one of them. Xiang Yu was just a witch ghost, and a witch ghost that had just evolved. There were at least a dozen great witch ghosts in Luocha country that were stronger than him, and there were also some veteran witch ghosts that were even more in number. However, in the intercourse, he was appointed as one of the 4 great protectors. He had neither strength nor ability. Chu Qianyue was very clear that in Xing Paoluo's eyes, He was just a chess piece that could be used in the future, so he gave himself a lot of benefits to keep him. The high status of the princess, the vast land of the Rakshasa state, the supreme power, and even the powerful strength. After the zombie blood in Chu Qianyue's body had been activated, her strength had advanced by leaps and bounds. After this short period of cultivation, she had made another step forward. Now that she has reached the middle stage of Jindan, Chu Qianyue has a secret that no one knows, that is, she can still use the cultivation techniques, magic weapons and talismans of cultivators. In fact, he was even more proficient in using it, and its power was even greater. Therefore, Chu Qianyue's strength was far more than what it looked like. Intercourse had always looked down on this princess, who relied on her father's relationship to get to the top. However, if one day Intercourse could not help but rebel against Chu Qianyue, then he would realize how ridiculous his idea of looking down on Chu Qianyue was. Li Daochong naturally recognized the musical soul ghost. When he discovered it, he had already covered it with his spiritual sense. At this moment, his spiritual sense turned into countless threads and invaded the musical soul ghost's dead soul. It's okay, it didn't hear much. The part that was transmitted out was also interfered with by my spiritual sense, so it has already disappeared. Teacher Chu, you don't have to worry, Li Daochong said after searching the musical soul ghost's dead soul. Hearing this, Chu Qianyue's heart relaxed, and then she said, "Destroy it. The musical soul ghost is very cunning, it can also use illusory sounds to confuse people." Even without Chu Qianyue's order, Li Daochong would do so. How could he miss such a delicious food? With a pinch of his hand, the musical soul ghost was pinched into meat paste by Li Daochong's big hand before it even had the chance to scream. Spiritual qi poured in from the wound of the musical soul ghost like a tide, and then the dark body and the ghost body began to burn, turning into a ball of raging blue fire. The musical soul ghost struggled desperately in the flame, uttering terrifying cries. Surrounded by Li Daochong's gang's spirit barrier, no sound could be transmitted out. After a while, the musical soul ghost was completely burned out and disappeared into nothingness. A faint dark green mist was sucked into Li Daochong's body. Beep! One musical soul ghost was killed. Soul power gained. A prompt came from the depths of Li Daochong's sea of consciousness. The spiritual qi in his body increased a little, but there was still a long way to go before he could level up. Every time Li Daochong leveled up, the amount of spiritual qi required for the next level was almost as much as the total amount of spiritual qi required for the previous levels. The increase was extremely terrifying. Thus, when he reached the middle stage of Jindan, the amount of spiritual qi converted from killing a low-level soul catcher ghost was not much to Li Daochong. After killing the musical soul ghost, Li Daochong swept through the mansion from top to bottom, eliminating all the fish that had escaped the net. Only then did he return to his original room. The master and disciple chatted for a long time. About an hour later, Li Daochong came out of the mansion. The spatial barrier around the mansion had disappeared. It was already afternoon when Li Daochong returned to the Yin family. Princess Catherine and old Ghost Zhang were also brought here. After Anmanian returned, he sent someone to investigate the mansion. In the end, the scout returned and said that there was nothing inside. He only saw Li Daochong walking out of the mansion. In reality, Li Daochong deliberately let the scout see him. Anmanian told the scout to check the mansion after Li Daochong left. The scout did as he was told. When he entered, he saw that it was a mess. It was obvious that a great battle had taken place. The death aura in the mansion was still very strong, but not a single dark ghost could be found. The scout used the most advanced spiritual light instrument to scan the place. The result almost scared the scout to death. There were fragments of the dark ghost's dark body everywhere. Most of them only had their edges and corners left. Someone had torn all the dark ghosts here to shreds. The spy reported everything he had found to Anmanian without missing a single detail. The higher-ups of the An family were horrified. Li Daocheng's performance outside the grotto was already shocking enough, but they still underestimated him. An Sinuo originally wanted to look for Li Daocheng to reminisce about old times, but when she heard that Li Daocheng had torn those things from the Hades to shreds, an indescribable feeling arose in her heart. She knew that she could no longer speak freely with Li Daocheng like in the past. It was even more impossible for them to become friends. The two of them were from different worlds, and Dingbang had always treated Li Daocheng as a brother, but now he couldn't. And Dingbang sighed softly. His talent was limited. In the end, he couldn't keep up with Li Daocheng's footstep. Anmanian prepared a banquet of the highest standards to receive Li Daocheng, but he was rejected. Li Daocheng didn't come to Planet Crimson Sun to show off. He had basically achieved his goal, but he still had to give Third Master Yin the money he deserved. The next day, Li Daocheng went to the Crimson Gold Mansion again. This time, Third Master Yin was bent over, almost kneeling on the ground. In less than half an hour, Third Master Yin handed over 200,000 mid-grade spirit stones to Li Daocheng. After returning to the An clan, Anmanian gave Li Daocheng an extra 100,000 mid-grade spirit stones. This was considered to be the purchase of the Frost Soul Origin Crystal that Li Daocheng had given him earlier. With this, Li Daocheng's wallet immediately bulged. 10 million low-grade spirit stones and 300,000 mid-grade spirit stones. This money was enough for Li Daocheng to buy the materials needed to craft a rank 12 talisman. With Princess Catherine's help, Li Daocheng didn't need to buy the usnea poison liquid. This was the most expensive material to craft a high-grade talisman. It was sold by the milliliter, and 1 milliliter cost 500,000 low-grade spirit stones. About 10 milliliters was the amount needed to craft a talisman. One day later, Li Daocheng brought the sleeping little monkey, Old Ghost Zhang, and Princess Catherine out of the An clan and came to the underground city once again. This time, they were going to the Shadow Serene Square to gather materials. At the same time, Old Ghost Zhang could come up with a plan to repair Tsang Ink. A young man, a curvaceous woman, and an old man with wrinkles all over his face. This combination was somewhat special. When they entered the Shadow Serene Square, they immediately attracted the attention of many people. These three people were Li Daocheng, Princess Catherine, and Old Ghost Zhang. After the shabby monkey ate its fill at the old mansion, it curled up in Li Daocheng's arms and fell asleep. No matter how loud the commotion outside was, it didn't disturb it at all. It slept soundly. Li Daocheng walked at the front. The moment he stepped into the Shadow Serene Square, Xing Jiao immediately ran up to him like the wind. Mr. Li, no, Jiao Jiao should call you Senior Li now. Xing Jiao smiled as she looked at Li Daocheng. Like last time, Xing Jiao did not shy away from giving Li Daocheng a big hug. It was as if they were lovers who had just met after a long separation. When Concubine Se saw this scene, her eyes revealed a bit of surprise. She immediately had a higher opinion of this woman who dared to hug Li Daocheng. In Princess Catherine's mind, Li Daocheng was no doubt a demon. Her beauty was useless in front of him. The scene of her being tortured to death that day was still fresh in her mind. Just thinking about it made Princess Catherine's hair stand on end. Xing Jiao was now the boss of the Shadow Serene Square branch on Red Sun Planet. She personally received them, so naturally, there were no obstructions. Xing Jiao brought the three of them directly into her office. Li Daocheng did not stand on ceremony and directly stated his intentions. He also told Xing Jiao the items he needed. Seeing the list of items, Xing Jiao looked troubled. There were more than a dozen items, and none of them were ordinary. Even the Shadow Serene Square would find it difficult to get them all at once. However, Xing Jiao did not show it. Since Li Daocheng had said it, even if it was difficult, she had to get it. Senior Li, I can get these materials, but it will take some time, Xing Jiao told the truth. How long will it take? Li Daocheng asked. 3 days, Tsing Jiao immediately replied. Okay, then I'll stay here for 3 days. Just tell me how much you need, Li Daochong nodded. According to the normal market price, it will cost about 4 million elementary spirit stones. Senior Li is an old friend of our Shadow Serene Square and is my benefactor. I'll give you a 50% discount. 2 million elementary spirit stones will do, Tsing Jiao said happily. When old Ghost Zhang heard Tsing Jiao's 50% discount, his jaw almost dropped. 50% discount? Old Ghost Zhang had been in the Shadow Serene Square for dozens of years, but he had never heard of a 50% discount for a customer. Generally, it would be a 5% discount or 10% discount. Even the biggest customers or Yuanying's cultivators would only get a 20% discount. Tsing Jiao immediately offered a 50% discount. As far as old Ghost Zhang knew, she did not have the authority to do so unless she paid for it herself. This girl really valued Li Daochong. However, she had not misjudged him. Until now, Li Daochong's momentum had not slowed down at all. Instead, it had sped up. Zheng Li, you don't have to give me so much every time. I still remember your previous favor. Let's just go with the original price this time. Li Daochong was not short of money and did not want to owe too many favors. Tsing Jiao wanted to say something, but Li Daochong had already thrown the storage bag to her. There are 10 million elementary spirit stones inside. You can use it to buy the materials and return it to me when you're done. 10 million elementary spirit stones were given to Tsing Jiao, which fully showed Li Daochong's trust in her. Tsing Jiao felt happy in her heart. Of course, she knew what Li Daochong's action meant. Old Ghost Zhang smiled. This girl's goodwill towards Li Daochong had not been in vain. With such a big backer, it would be convenient for her to do anything in the future. Li Daochong and Wei Beitong's relationship was also not ordinary. Tsing Jiao, this girl, had made the right bet. Tsing Jiao then arranged for Li Daochong and the other two to stay in the highest standard guest room in the Shadow Serene Square. Over the next 3 days, old Ghost Zhang worked on the repair plan for Tsang ink while studying the chilling soul source crystal and the heavy marrow heptagram silver core. Princess Catherine, with Li Daochong's acquiescence, went shopping in the Shadow Serene Square, buying a large number of spiritual liquids and spiritual medicines for her future cultivation. Li Daochong was not stingy. He put all the things Princess Catherine bought on his bill. Before, he had been threatening Princess Catherine, and now it was time to do her a favor. Li Daochong spent most of his time in the room. While consolidating his cultivation, he began to study the Great Void Sword technique. Now it was time to practice this mysterious technique. After studying for half a day, Li Daochong asked Tsing Jiao to send over tons of top-grade spiritual liquids, dozens of bottles of various recovery spiritual medicines, and a set of spirit-gathering array. With these things, Li Daochong was a little relieved. Entering the interface of the hot-blooded upgrader, a holographic window appeared in front of Li Daochong. There was a very simple sentence written on it. Do you want to practice the Great Void Sword technique? Li Daochong took a deep breath and chose yes. The moment he chose, boom! Chapter 427. Li Daochong collapsed in an instant, sweating profusely all over his body. The majestic spirit qi in his body seemed to have been sucked out. He was so exhausted that he didn't even have the strength to raise his hand. Li Daochong thought that with the cultivation of Jin Dan middle stage, he wouldn't be too embarrassed to learn divine powers. But he still underestimated the Great Void Sword technique. Thump! Li Daochong couldn't support himself anymore. He sat cross-legged on the bed and fell to the ground. His vision turned black, and he didn't know anything. After an unknown period of time, Li Daochong opened his eyes with difficulty. He just had a dream. He was practicing a set of sword technique in a closed space and repeatedly practiced it tens of thousands of times. He also fought with various mirror puppets that he couldn't see clearly. He couldn't stop even if he wanted to. At this time, Li Daochong had a complete and mysterious set of Great Void Sword technique in his sea of consciousness. It was as if he had learned it since he was born. But now Li Daochong didn't have the strength to think too much. Just thinking about the sword technique gave him a splitting headache. Li Daochong used all his strength to turn his wrist and look at the time on his wristwatch. He had been unconscious for more than 10 hours. The spiritual liquid vat was less than 2 meters away, but Li Daochong crawled for more than 10 minutes before he climbed into the vat. Splash! Li Daochong flipped into the vat and splashed the spiritual liquid. When his whole body was immersed in the spiritual liquid, he quickly felt much more comfortable. His sore body greedily sucked in the spiritual liquid as if it was thirsty. After being reborn, Li Daochong's body had transcended the mortal body and became a spiritual body. The speed at which his skin absorbed the spiritual liquid was several times faster than before. In just a few minutes, more than half of the spiritual liquid in the vat, which was the size of 2 bathtubs, was gone. The remaining half of the spiritual liquid was turbid and viscous, with some black impurities. Li Daochong's body felt much better. He could already support his body and stand up. He poured the turbid liquid away and filled it with fresh spiritual liquid again. After repeating this 3 times, Li Daochong finally recovered some spirit qi. Some color returned to his pale face. Li Daochong ate some more elixirs, and his exhaustion finally disappeared. However, the spiritual energy in his body was still very empty. Although the hot-blooded upgrader could instantly cultivate a type of cultivation technique, the body would have to bear a huge burden. It was equivalent to projecting years or even decades of cultivation into one's body and mind in an instant. If his cultivation wasn't high enough, he might just die from exhaustion if he tried to cultivate a powerful cultivation technique. Li Daochong had been careful enough. He had waited for so long without touching the Great Void swordsmanship. It was not until the middle stage of Jin Dan that he made the decision to cultivate it. However, Li Daochong still underestimated the thickness of the Great Void sword technique. Even Jin Dan, who was in the middle stage, almost could not withstand it. During the moment of cultivation, Li Daochong even felt the threat of death. His body was instantly hollowed out, and even the most powerful Sun Jin Dan in his body was almost unable to withstand it. What level was this cultivation technique? Li Daochong looked at his hands. 2 faint Tai Chi patterns appeared in his palms. In the middle, there was a sword-shaped shadow spinning at high speed. This was not a cultivation technique. No matter how he looked at it, it was more like a kind of magical power. Li Daochong couldn't figure out what was going on for the time being. He could only wait for the effect to be seen in the future. Li Daochong sat in the spiritual liquid vat again and adjusted his breathing. There was still a long way to go before his body completely recovered. A day and a night passed. Li Daochong almost used up all the spiritual liquids and elixirs that he had prepared. Only then did he basically recover. After sitting for half a day, the spirit qi in his body was completely restored. When Li Daochong walked out of the room, it was already 3 days later. Xing Jiao arrived as promised. She had obtained more than a dozen items in sufficient quantity. "Senior Li, everything you want is here." Xing Jiao looked very tired. She had spent a lot of effort to obtain these high-grade materials. She had barely slept in the past 3 days. She had used all the channels available to her and purchased them at a high price. The materials that Li Daochong needed were of higher grade each time. This time, Xing Jiao had already reached her limit. If there was a next time, Xing Jiao didn't know if she could collect everything again. Li Daochong glanced at the items that Xing Jiao took out and nodded slightly. Then, he put them all into his storage ring. Xing Jiao returned the remaining spirit stones to Li Daochong. A total of 5 million elementary spirit stones were used. More than 300,000 of them were used by Princess Catherine. Li Daochong knew that it wasn't easy to obtain these materials. If it wasn't for Tsing Jiao's position, he probably wouldn't have been able to obtain even a third of it. Li Daochong took out an empty storage bag. He put some spirit stones into it and threw it to Tsing Jiao. "This is your commission. I can't let you work for free. Senior Li, it's Tsing Jiao's honor to work for you. How can I take your commission?" Tsing Jiao refused. "Just take it. It's what you deserve." Li Daochong didn't want to waste time and frowned. Tsing Jiao saw that Li Daochong was unhappy and didn't dare to refuse. She took the storage bag and swept it with her mental force. She was shocked. There were 1,000,000 elementary spirit stones inside. She didn't think that Li Daochong would give her so much. Li Daochong's return this time had taken a lot longer than he had expected. Many things had happened in between, one after another. Li Daochong originally thought that he would return to the Blue Bay Star and return to the Scarlet Sun Star in a week. He didn't expect that a month would soon be up. It was time to report to the North Star University. He had agreed to meet Tang Xian for a month. There were only a few days left. It would take 5 days to travel from the 4th ring star zone to the 2nd ring star zone using the fastest flight. Li Daochong directly went to the only teleportation array on the Scarlet Sun Star. Although the cost of teleportation was shocking, Li Daochong didn't lack spirit stones. He could afford it even if he brought Princess Catherine and Old Ghost Zhang. The three of them spent 900,000 elementary spirit stones to teleport from the Scarlet Sun Star to the Dark Parasol Star. The teleportation array on the Dark Parasol Star was much more selective. There were more than 10 teleportation arrays on the Dark Parasol Star. They were all channels to different cultivation planet. However, entering the 3rd ring starfield wasn't something that could be done casually. Li Daochong had his identity verified. He was already a student of the North Star University and had the official admission notice. Princess Catherine and Old Ghost Zhang didn't have it. They couldn't enter the 3rd ring star zone. It was useless even if they provided the teleportation fee. Li Daochong had no choice but to look for spiritual master Huaiyang and go through some procedures. In the end, Princess Catherine and Old Ghost Zhang were verified as Li Daochong's servant and follower. When spiritual master Huaiyang saw Li Daochong again, he was shocked. It had only been a month and this kid's cultivation had broken through again. This cultivation speed was comparable to those freaks in the Central Star Zone who were treasured by the Federation. It was also Li Daochong's first time entering the 4th ring star zone. His heart was filled with curiosity. Princess Catherine was even more excited. She never dreamed that she would be able to enter the 3rd ring star zone of the Shenghua Federation. The 3rd ring star zone belonged to the Outer Federation. The 3rd ring star zone was the core of the Shenghua Federation. Only Old Ghost Zhang was calm. He had come from there in the past. After 3 teleportations, the 3 of them arrived at Yuanqing Planet, the cultivation planet where North Star University was located. This was a 2nd-class cultivation planet, which was much higher than Kangwu Planet. There were at least hundreds of Yuanying cultivators on Yuanqing Planet. There were even great cultivators in the late and peak stage of Yuanying. In the 3rd ring star zone, the power of families was no longer the main force. Instead, the power of cultivation companies had become the main force. No matter how powerful a family was, it could not compete with a large cultivation company. Although there were some super families among the major shareholders of many cultivation companies, they mostly acted as investors. The people who truly controlled the cultivation companies were those powerful cultivators and special cultivation talent. In fact, cultivation companies were a little similar to the sects and gangs of ancient times. However, they were more cohesive and professional. They were also more humane and changed faster. In order to gain a foothold in the company, one had to have real skills. They either had to be able to bring benefits to the company or had to be a technical talent. You had to know what others did not. Otherwise, you would be eliminated very quickly. It was the unchanging rule of cultivation companies that only the capable could survive. No one could stay in their position forever. There were no elders, deacons, or clan leaders in cultivation companies. The highest authority was represented by the board of directors. Then, there was a clear management hierarchy from the CEO to the director, department heads, and so on. This was almost the same as the world Li Daochong came from. The teleportation array was the greatest historical relic left behind from ancient times. There was no other one like it. Li Daochong and the other two had crossed the vast starry sky from Red Sun Planet to North Star Planet. If they had taken the fastest flying shuttle, it would have taken about 5 days and 5 nights, and they would have had to make several space jumps. However, using the teleportation array only took 7 or 8 hours. In fact, if they only calculated the teleportation time, it would not have taken more than 20 minutes. The reason why it took 7 or 8 hours was that they needed to rest after each teleportation. With Li Daochong and Jean Dan's cultivation, they were not afraid of the impact of the teleportation. However, Princess Catherine and Old Ghost Zhang could not bear it. The two had to rest for 1 or 2 hours before continuing with the next teleportation. Otherwise, there would be negative consequences. If it was just Li Daochong alone, it would have taken less than half an hour to reach North Star Planet from Red Sun Planet. Of course, the speed was fast, but the cost was shocking. If Li Daochong had not plundered the Red Sun Planet and obtained the chilling Soul Source Crystal, he would not have been able to afford this teleportation. After the 3 of them had gone through 4 teleportations, they had spent a total of 3,800,000 elementary-grade spirit stones. Li Daochong had spent the 10 million elementary-grade spirit stones that he had obtained from the Yi family in just a few days. He still had 300,000 medial-grade spirit stones on him. After coming out of the teleportation array on the outskirts of North Star City, the 3 of them immediately took a public flying shuttle and entered North Star City. In terms of scale, North Star City was not much different from Blue Bay Star's Tianyuan City. The number of people and the area were basically the same. However, there were tens of thousands of cultivators flying in the sky above North Star City. At a glance, they were densely packed like grasshoppers. On the other hand, flying shuttles were flying back and forth in an orderly manner at a specific height below. North Star City was much more prosperous than Kangwu Star. If Blue Bay Star was a remote village, then Kangwu Star was at best a county town. North Star City was a real metropolis. Even if it had not reached the level of a first-class cultivator city, it was not far from it. The only difference was that between Hangzhou and Shanghai. Princess Catherine looked out the window at the countless cultivators flying back and forth on their flying swords. The streets below were filled with pedestrians wearing all kinds of robes. She suddenly felt like a villager entering the city. Princess Catherine's dress was avant-garde and fashionable enough. However, when she entered the metropolis, she immediately felt ashamed of her inferiority. Ardwolf, that girl seems to be a monster. She looks so beautiful. Behind the public flying shuttle, 2 big men, one tall and one short, stared at Princess Catherine for a long time with shifty eyes. They did not move their eyes away from her since she got on the bus. The short man rubbed his hands and said. The tall man was bald and had a threatening aura. The people on the public flying shuttle consciously distanced themselves from him. He was a body practitioner in the middle stage of the Qi gathering. His muscles were like lumps of iron. The short man's length was injured, but his width was considerable. He was full of fat and his pair of small eyes were only a line. There was a ferocious scorpion tattoo on their neck. The locals avoided this tattoo in fear. This was the symbol of the Scorpion Gang in North Star City's Star River District. The tall man, who was called Ardwolf, had a greedy look in his eyes. He grabbed the buttocks of a young man in front of him. The young man groaned and his face turned red. However, he did not dare to make a sound and his body was trembling. Ardwolf raised his wristwatch and scanned it. It immediately showed some information about Princess Catherine. Ardwolf licked his lip. Erju, it's a monster girl. When Erju heard this, his small linear eyes emitted a brilliance. Ardwolf, good stuff. If you sell her in the underground city, she'll be worth at least a few 100,000 elementary spirit stones. Ardwolf slapped the back of Erju's head. Erju grimaced in pain. Why did you hit me? Chapter 428. There weren't many people on the public flying shuttle. There were dozens of seats, but only a dozen or so people were sitting. This kind of flying shuttle, which mainly relied on flying spiritual arrays, didn't have a driver. Those who took the public flying shuttle were all grassroots office workers from the suburbs, typical of the North Star planet's drifters. As people at the bottom of society, these people were afraid to avoid gang members like the Scorpion Gang. Therefore, the seats around the two punks, Ardwolf and Erju, were empty. Everyone gathered in the front with a tacit understanding. Only a young man sat behind the two, and a woman and an old man sat in the middle. Sitting alone in the back was naturally Li Daochong. He sat in the back for no particular reason, just to get a better view of the outside world. Because there was a skylight at the top of the back row, he could directly see the cultivators flying back and forth in the sky, as well as the radiance above North Star City. The conversation between Ardwolf and Erju fell into Li Daochong's ears word for word. In addition to feeling a little funny, Li Daochong also cast a trace of sympathy for the two punks. Li Daochong hoped that these two punks were just talking and wouldn't really do anything. Otherwise, they might die very miserably. Li Daochong saw the two punks stand up and walk towards Princess Catherine. He shook his head slightly and continued to look out the window. After a while, two screams were heard. Ardwolf and Erju, the two punks, fell to the ground as if they had been electrocuted. Little girl, you've got guts. Just wait for me. I'll show you. Ardwolf said ruthlessly. Ardwolf got up and connected his wristwatch to send a message. Princess Catherine glanced at the two with contempt. She didn't care. She didn't understand who gave them the courage to take liberties with her. The two punks awkwardly sat back in their seats, but their eyes revealed a bit of ferocity. The whole thing ended as quickly as it started. The passengers in the front row didn't want to cause trouble. They hurriedly looked back and acted as if nothing had happened. After seeing Princess Catherine's delicate little face, 2 or 3 young men showed a bit of regret. One of the young men shook his head and whispered to his friend sitting next to him, "That woman is so beautiful. She provoked the Scorpion Gang. It's over." His friend next to him said, "Isn't it? More than 10 days ago, a young couple provoked the Scorpion Gang. Relying on their little ability, they injured 3 members of the Scorpion Gang. As a result, the couple disappeared from the face of the earth. 3 days later, the man's body was found in a ditch in the suburbs. The woman was even worse. She was played by more than 10 people and then transported to the black prison to be sold to a devil cultivator from the eastern country." After the young man heard this, the look of regret on his face became even more intense. He wanted to be the hero to save the beauty, but he didn't have the strength to do so. A beautiful woman sitting behind them was so scared that her face was pale and her body was trembling. Just thinking about it was scary. When the public flying shuttle stopped at the station, the woman didn't care if she had arrived at her destination and immediately got off. With Princess Catherine's hearing, how could she not hear the conversation between the two men? As for the content, she sneered at it. She didn't put a small gang in her eyes. A month ago, she was still a hall master of one of the 3 major gangs in the Federation, the Blood Knife Society. About 10 minutes later, the bus stopped at Xingyang Street Station. There was still some distance from North Star University. However, Li Daochong didn't plan to go directly to North Star University. Xingyang Street was the famous miscellaneous treasure trading market in North Star City. To put it bluntly, it was a bit similar to the antique market. But it was much more complicated than the antique market. There were many more varieties, from the ancient cultivation era to the great cultivation era. The time span was tens of thousands of years. During this period, there were countless treasures with various uses. There were all kinds of things, real and fake. Li Daochong did a simple investigation of North Star City during the break in the teleportation. Li Daochong didn't plan to live in the dormitory arranged by North Star University. That would be too restrictive. Moreover, he had Princess Catherine and Old Devil Zhang with him. There was also the Shabai monkey. They couldn't live in the dormitory with him. Therefore, Li Daochong decided to buy a shop in the miscellaneous treasure trading market. First, it would allow Old Devil Zhang to continue doing business. Li Daochong knew Old Devil Zhang through trading. Second, with an independent residence, it would be more convenient for Li Daochong to do things. Princess Catherine could be Old Devil Zhang's assistant, and the Shabai monkey could be raised as a pet. Li Daochong still had 300,000 mid-grade spirit stones on him. If converted to low-grade spirit stones, it would be 30 million. This amount of money was enough to buy a luxurious residence for mortals in a metropolis like North Star City. If he wanted to buy a cultivation room specially prepared for cultivators, this amount of money would not be enough. The name Xingyang Street had almost been forgotten. It was now called Miscellaneous Treasure Street. Li Daochong directly got off the public flying shuttle from the back door. Princess Catherine and Old Devil Zhang got off from the middle door. Princess Catherine had just gotten off the shuttle when she was surrounded by a group of burly men. When the crowd around the platform saw this, they all moved aside. Ardwolf and Air Zhu had a sinister smile on their faces. Ardwolf licked his lips and said, "Little girl, aren't you good at fighting? Let's see if you can still beat so many people." Princess Catherine frowned. This was not the end. She took advantage of the situation and struck out with her palm. Ardwolf's body, which was nearly 2 meters long, was directly slapped away. He fell more than 10 meters away and fell flat on his face. "Little girl, you're courting death." Seeing Ardwolf being sent flying, Air Zhu glared and cursed. When the group of burly men saw this, they thought that this girl was actually beating up a member of the Scorpion gang in public. She was really tired of living. They immediately swarmed up to beat up Princess Catherine. "Stop!" Suddenly, a shout rang out. When the group of burly men heard the voice, they could not help but shiver. They turned around and saw a slender young man wearing a brass robe walking over. The dozen or so burly men immediately bowed to the young man and said in unison, "Sir Copper Scorpion." Ardwolf got up from the ground with a dusty face. He carefully ran to the young man and bowed. "Sir Copper Scorpion, why are you here?" Copper Scorpion glanced at Ardwolf in disgust and snorted. "Do I need to report to you where I go?" Ardwolf's face turned pale when he heard this. He directly knelt down and said with a sad face, "Sir Copper Scorpion, please don't be angry. I didn't mean that. I just think that such a small matter doesn't need you to come forward." At this moment, not only Ardwolf, but the scattered crowd also showed a look of horror when they saw Copper Scorpion. Copper Scorpion's notoriety had long been known in this area. As the third leader of the Scorpion gang, Copper Scorpion naturally had his own abilities. His cultivation level of the middle stage of the Foundation Establishment stage was the best proof. A Foundation Establishment stage cultivator in a regional gang was enough to show how high the North Star star was. This was unimaginable outside the third ring star zone. How could a cultivator be involved with a gangster? The Scorpion gang mainly engaged in debt collection, pimping, and slave-selling businesses in the North Star City. As soon as Ardwolf's voice fell, Copper Scorpion raised his foot and stepped on Ardwolf's shoulder. Ardwolf didn't dare to make a sound. He was no longer as fierce as before and just let Copper Scorpion trample on his dignity. Copper Scorpion then turned to Princess Catherine and smiled. "Beautiful lady, they were too rude. Please forgive them." Copper Scorpion politely extended his hand. Princess Catherine didn't expect this guy, who had a high status among the gangsters, to be so gentlemanly. Princess Catherine didn't think much of it. She didn't hit a smiling person. Her face was still cold, but she still extended her hand to shake his hand. The moment Princess Catherine extended her hand, Li Daochong, who had been looking at the street map on the other side of the platform, had a flash of brilliance in the corner of his eyes. Li Daochong felt that something was wrong when Copper Scorpion extended his hand. He was about to stop Princess Catherine from shaking his hand when he saw a small flying shuttle at a low altitude. It had lost control for some reason and was emitting black smoke. It swooped down and crashed into a little girl who was carrying a basket of purple flame flowers in her hand. The pedestrians on both sides of the street exclaimed. Li Daochong didn't even think about it. He instantly appeared beside the little girl and pulled her away. The flying shuttle scraped the ground and burst into dazzling sparks, leaving a long scorch mark on the ground. The little girl was saved. Everyone secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Even the gangsters of the Scorpion Gang were attracted to look over. "Thank you, little brother." The little girl looked up at Li Daochong with a pair of big watery eyes and said crisply. There was a hint of shyness in her tender voice. In a trance, Li Daochong thought of the silver bottle. However, the little girl's unusual calmness surprised Li Daochong. Even an adult would be scared silly in the face of such a sudden incident, unable to recover for a long time. Although the little girl's delicate little face had a frightened expression, her brain did not short-circuit, nor did she not know what to do. She immediately expressed her gratitude to Li Daochong. Her mind was very clear and she didn't panic at all. The little girl looked like she was only 8 or 9 years old. To be able to have such wisdom, she had either gone through hardships or was born with a calm mind. "You're welcome," Li Daochong replied with a gentle smile. The way she called him little brother sounded very comfortable. "Little brother, here you go." The little girl took out a purple flame flower from the basket and handed it to Li Daochong. Her big watery eyes were filled with eagerness. The purple flame flower was a kind of low-grade spirit flower that had extremely harsh conditions to grow. It didn't have much value by itself, but it was beautiful and took a long time to bloom. Cultivators didn't care about this kind of spirit flower, but mortals valued it very much. It symbolized passionate love. It was a bit like the roses on earth. The purple flame flower grew on cliff. Because cultivators didn't cultivate it, mortals couldn't grow it either. If one wanted to get this kind of flower, they could only go to the cliffs to pick it. One flower could be sold for hundreds of Federation coins, and the price would be even higher during festivals. The little girl's hand was full of small cracks. This was a pair of hands that shouldn't appear on an 8 or 9-year-old child. Li Daochong took the flower and squatted down to pat the little girl's face. "What's your name?" The little girl was a little embarrassed and pursed her lips. She seemed to be a little dissatisfied with Li Daochong patting her face without permission. However, seeing that Li Daochong had just saved her life, she didn't hold it against him. She paused for a moment and replied, "My name is Xiaoling River." "Xiaoling River," Li Daochong repeated and continued, "How much did this flower cost?" Xiaoling River quickly shook her head. "Little brother, this is a gift from me. It's free." Li Daochong smiled and took out 2 mid-grade spirit stones and stuffed them into Xiaoling River's little hand. At the same time, he took the flower basket from her hand. "I want all your flowers." Looking at the 2 mid-grade spirit stones in her hand, Xiaoling River was a little dumbfounded. Of course, she knew what spirit stones were, but she had never really touched this kind of currency that existed among cultivators. It was said that 1 spirit stone was worth a few thousand Federation coins. 2 spirit stones were more than enough to buy her basket of purple flame flowers. Xiaoling River only knew about spirit stones, but she didn't know that spirit stones were divided into different grades. The value of a mid-grade spirit stone was much higher than that of a beginner spirit stone. When Xiaoling River recovered from her shock, Li Daochong had already walked away with the flower basket. Li Daochong saved Xiaoling River and exchanged a few words. The entire process took less than 2 minutes. On the platform, Princess Catherine reached out to shake Copper Scorpion's hand. The latter's smile immediately deepened. Just as Princess Catherine was about to speak, she felt the world in front of her begin to spin. Old Devil Zhang, who had been standing beside Princess Catherine, noticed that something was wrong. "Girl, are you all right?" Princess Catherine gritted her teeth and raised her hand. The hand that had just touched Copper Scorpion was slightly red and itchy. "You poisoned me," Princess Catherine said angrily. "Poisoned you? How could I? I just poisoned you. How could I, Copper Scorpion, do something as despicable as poisoning you?" Copper Scorpion said shamelessly. "You." Princess Catherine felt dizzy, and the breath in her body was chaotic. She couldn't gather any strength and was about to collapse. Copper Scorpion stepped on Ardwolf and held Princess Catherine's waist. He looked down at Ardwolf and said, "You've been in the Scorpion Gang for so many years. What else can you do besides relying on the gang's power to do things without thinking? Don't you know how to use your brain? Aren't you just a snake girl in the early stage of Foundation establishment? You made it so complicated and even mobilized so many people to come here. Look at you." Copper Scorpion kicked Ardwolf away. Ardwolf rolled on the ground a few times before he got up. Copper Scorpion picked up Princess Catherine and turned to leave. However, as soon as he turned around, he saw a young man standing behind him with a flower basket in his hand. Copper Scorpion was so scared that he almost jumped up. He didn't feel anything and had no idea that someone was standing behind him. "If you don't want to die, put her down." Chapter 429. Old Devil Zhang didn't move at all. He didn't know Snake Girl very well. As an experienced vendor, Old Devil Zhang would never do anything that didn't benefit him. Besides, with Li Daochong around, he didn't need Snake Girl's help. When Li Daochong finally stood up, Old Devil Zhang suddenly felt sorry for these street ruffians. Of all the people to mess with, they had to mess with Li Daochong. Weren't they just digging their own graves? There were 3 major gangs in the Federation. One of them was destroyed by Li Daochong, and the other one had a special relationship with Li Daochong. How could a motley crew challenge Li Daochong? Was this a joke? Old Devil Zhang shook his head subconsciously. Li Daochong's tone was calm and his expression was indifferent. He didn't look aggressive at all. Instead, he was very gentle. Copper Scorpion quickly recovered from his momentary shock. Looking at the harmless young man who was carrying a basket of flowers and whose aura was only at the refinement stage, his face immediately turned cold. "Kid, do you know who you're talking to?" Li Daochong picked up a purple flame flower from the basket. He pinched the stem between his thumb and forefinger, then put it under his nose and took a deep breath. His expression showed that he was enjoying it. It smelled so good. As for what Copper Scorpion was saying, Li Daochong didn't care at all. "How dare you block Master Copper Scorpion's way? Are you tired of living?" A bald man next to him shouted and rushed up to punch Li Daochong in the face. Sigh. A soft sigh. A petal fell from the purple flame flower in Li Daochong's hand. Whoosh! It flew through the air. "Ah!" The bald man screamed and knelt on the ground. His knees were bleeding as if they had been cut by a sharp weapon. Copper Scorpion's pupils suddenly shrank. The way he looked at Li Daochong suddenly changed. "Friend, do you want this snake girl?" Copper Scorpion changed his tone and asked in a negotiating manner. Li Daochong patted Copper Scorpion's shoulder and said calmly, "I won't kill you today since the kid is here. Next time, if I see you bullying the weak and taking women by force, I'll crush your bones and scatter your ashes." It was Li Daochong and the other 2. If it were other people, they would be bullying the weak and taking women by force. Copper Scorpion's eyes flashed coldly. Friend, I don't care where you come from, you'd better ask around. What does the Scorpion Gang do? Zhang, Copper Scorpions, he put the flowers in the basket, and give them to old Zhang. Zhang, take care of them. Zhang s. Old Zhang. Heat he's Zhang's teat. Just as old Zhang was about to move, Copper Scorpion waved his hand and knocked the basket to the ground. Old Zhang was stunned. He looked at Copper Scorpion with widened eyes and said earnestly, Young man, you've really messed with the wrong person. Isn't it good to be alive? The fear that Copper Scorpion had just shown towards Li Daochong suddenly disappeared. A tall and sturdy man in silver robes descended from the sky. Silver Scorpion. Another big shot of the Scorpion Gang had arrived. Silver Scorpion didn't hide his aura at all. The pressure of the building foundation stage spread all over the place. With the platform as the center, the area within a radius of 100 meters was suppressed by his unbridled aura. Many passers-by fell to the roadside in pain. Some of them had suffered internal injuries and even fainted. Lord Silver Scorpion. The gangsters of the Scorpion Gang became even more frightened and shouted in unison. As soon as Silver Scorpion landed, he looked greedily at Princess Catherine, who was in Copper Scorpion's arms. No other race could compare with the Lamia's figure. Their waists were small and their breasts were high. Their buttocks and long legs were the standard. Concubine Se was the best among the snake women. Whether it was her appearance or her figure, she was the best among the snake women. Silver Scorpion was called Silver Scorpion because of his lewd nature. Li Daochong didn't seem to see Silver Scorpion's arrival. He scanned the surroundings with his psychic power and found that there were at least a dozen children nearby, except for Xiaoling River. Obviously, this was not a good place to kill them. As a good young man, Li Daochong naturally didn't want to leave a shadow in the hearts of these children. It would be bad if they were molded into murderous maniacs. Li Daochong turned to look at old Zhang and said, Mr. Zhang, do you think it's better to let them die quietly, or let them go on the road with a deep impression? Old Zhang thought for a moment and replied seriously, They've done so many bad things. Wouldn't it be too easy for them to die quietly? Well, that makes sense. Li Daochong nodded slightly. What are these two idiots talking about? Are they out of their minds? No, I think they're scared out of their wits. Several gangsters from the Scorpion Gang sneered after hearing the conversation between Li Daochong and old Zhang. However, as soon as they finished speaking, an invisible force suddenly entangled them. Then, their vision blurred and the sound of wind whistling in their ears. More than 10 seconds later, when their vision recovered, they found that they were no longer where they were before. They were even no longer in the city. The flourishing North Star City was right next to them, and they were in a wasteland on the outskirts. It seemed to be a cemetery. More than a dozen gangsters were confused and didn't know what had happened. Ardwolf and Urju were baffled. It was fine if the gangsters didn't know what was going on. After all, their cultivation was low. Silver Scorpion and Bronze Scorpion were also confused. Bronze Scorpion maintained his posture of hugging someone, but there was nothing in his hands. Snake Girl was leaning next to Li Daochong at this moment and seemed to have regained some consciousness. Master, I'm sorry, Princess Catherine said weakly. This is not your fault, but you have to work harder in the future. It's your shame to be plotted against by such trash, Li Daochong said lightly. Yes, master. Princess Catherine was weak, but her attitude was very firm. Li Daochong helped Princess Catherine sit down as if there was no one else around. Silver Scorpion said in a deep voice, Who are you? There was a hint of fear in his voice. Dead people don't need to know too much. Li Daochong's tone was calm as usual, as if he was just talking about something very normal. For example, have you eaten? Something like that. As soon as he finished speaking, Li Daochong slapped his palm across the air. Bang! Bronze Scorpion did not react at all. His chest was hit hard and caved in. He spat out a mouthful of blood and looked at Li Daochong in shock. You! Bronze Scorpion could only spit out one word and could no longer speak. The heart-wrenching pain made him fall to the ground and roll in pain. This blow directly shattered Bronze Scorpion's spiritual root and injured all his internal organs. At the same time, he did not die on the spot. His blood vessels were intact and the nerve pain was stimulated just right. Li Daochong moved his telekinesis and several telekinesis threads shot out. In an instant, the 7 Scorpion Gang gangsters' eyes were glazed and then they began to go crazy and attack their companions. The 7 Scorpion Gang members were like mad dogs, pouncing on their companions and biting and scratching. Screams rose one after another in the wilderness. Being eaten by their companions who lived with them day and night, that kind of horror was not something that ordinary people could understand. Only Ardwolf and Zhu were not attacked and they did not go crazy. However, the two of them were completely dumbfounded at this time. Their 4 legs could not help but tremble. They did not know what had happened to them. How could the insufferably arrogant Scorpion Gang become like this? Li Daochong was still standing there. No one could tell what he had done at all. At least, no one present had the ability to see any clues. The fear in Silver Scorpion's heart continued to rise. He had probed the aura of the strange young man in front of him more than once. However, every time he probed, there was nothing. He could not sense his existence at all. Did I really see a ghost? Although Silver Scorpion cursed in his heart, he knew that it was not a ghost. It was just that the cultivation of the young man in front of him had far exceeded his understanding. A Jin Dan cultivator? Silver Scorpion sucked in a breath of cold air. With a thud, Silver Scorpion directly knelt in front of Li Daochong. Senior, I was blind. I didn't know that you were here. Please forgive me. I'm willing to serve you like an ox or a horse and work for you. There was no trace of emotion in Li Daochong's eyes. He said, no need. There's only one chance. If you miss it, you miss it. I guess you've hurt a lot of people. Compared to ghosts, you may be more terrible. With that, Li Daochong reached out his hand and patted Silver Scorpion's head. When the latter heard this, he knew that it was useless to say anything. Silver Scorpion's eyes narrowed. Since he was going to die anyway, he might as well fight. After thinking about it, he roared and the aura in his body burst out violently. He was ready to fight Li Daochong to the death. However, as soon as Silver Scorpion's aura burst out, the young man standing in front of him, who seemed to be just an ordinary person, burst out with an incomparably terrifying aura. It easily crushed Silver Scorpion's aura. Yuanying's Qi. Silver Scorpion's mind instantly went blank. Even Copper Scorpion, who was rolling on the ground in pain, was dumbfounded. What kind of existence had they provoked? At that moment, Silver Scorpion suddenly thought of a popular saying, "You have to pay for what you've done." Li Daochong's cultivation was naturally far from Yuanying's Qi, but his Jin Dan was the Sun Jin Dan. Whether it was the capacity of spiritual energy, purity, or condensation, it was far superior to other Jin Dan cultivators of the same level. As a responsible general, he was invincible under Yuanying. Even the very powerful Wu Gui in the intercourse was scared to death by Li Daochong's Eye of Thunder punishment. Not to mention that they were only 2 foundation establishment cultivators. Li Daochong stretched out his index finger, and some lightning appeared on his fingertip. He tapped it lightly. Was it a bag spring? Was it broken? Was it a double stillness? Silver Scorpion wanted to escape, but he couldn't move. His whole body was penetrated by lightning. Yun Chun Fu Silver Scorpion felt as if he had been pricked by tens of thousands of needles. Drops of blood seeped out of his pores. His face was distorted. The pain was like the punishment of the 18 layers of hell. Ardwolf and Zhu were like dead ashes. This young man who had appeared out of nowhere was now the incarnation of the Grim Reaper in their hearts. Copper Scorpion and Silver Scorpion were the two supreme bigwigs of the Scorpion gang. They were high and mighty cultivators, and they weren't ordinary cultivators either. They had once seen Silver Scorpion cripple several cultivators who had come looking for trouble with the Scorpion gang. Copper Scorpion was sinister and cunning. He was quite skilled in using poison. Although he didn't seem as strong as Silver Scorpion, in a real fight, many cultivators would probably choose Silver Scorpion over Copper Scorpion. His battle record was even more impressive. At least 2 Jean Dan cultivators had died at his hands. They had been poisoned to death. You've got guts. You dare to have designs on my maid? I heard everything you said on the public flying shuttle. Li Daochong turned his face and looked coldly at the two, scared out of their wits. Thud. Aardwolf and Erju were so scared that their lips turned purple. At the same time, they knelt down and kowtowed desperately. Upper Immortal, please spare our lives. Upper Immortal, please spare our lives. We were blind. The two wailed. Feeling that begging for mercy was far from enough, Aardwolf and Erju slapped their own mouths. Li Daochong just looked at them indifferently and didn't say anything. It wasn't until their faces were swollen and their mouths were full of blood that Li Daochong looked at Princess Catherine and asked indifferently, "Do you want to kill them?" Princess Catherine stared blankly. Her beautiful eyes were filled with doubt and incomprehension, but she was a little shocked in her heart. She had never thought that Li Daochong would actually ask for her opinion. Based on her contact and understanding with Li Daochong these days, this master never asked other people for their opinions. Was this a test for her? Or did he want to see if she had any other uses besides secreting venom? Princess Catherine's beautiful face throbbed slightly. Whether Li Daochong meant it or not, she had to answer this question carefully. After a 2 or 3 second pause, Princess Catherine said, "Master, I think you can spare their lives. Give me a reason." Li Daochong was eager to hear the details. "Master, this is your first time on planet Northstar, so you don't know much about this place. They should be locals and can be spies. Besides, this time Master will be staying on planet Northstar for a long time. You need people to develop your power. They can be your spokespeople in the lower gray areas of planet Northstar." Princess Catherine spoke her thoughts. "Well, then I'll leave them to you," Li Daochong responded. Princess Catherine was delighted. She'd guessed right. Master was testing her to see if she had any other uses. She should pass the first test. Princess Catherine took out 2 black pills and coldly said, "Open your mouths." Aardwolf and Erju didn't dare resist. They obediently opened their mouth. Princess Catherine flicked her hand and the 2 black pills shot into their mouth. "If you don't want to die, swallow them." Princess Catherine's voice was cold. The two's desire to live didn't allow them to make the slightest movement. They swallowed the pills, then opened their mouths to show Princess Catherine that they'd eaten them. "You've taken the poison pills I refined. You won't be affected for 7 days. But after that, if you don't take the antidote, you'll rot into a pool of black liquid. In 3 days I'll find you. Now get out of here." Concubine Se was as timid as a little white rabbit in front of Li Daochong, but at this moment, in front of the 2 gangsters, she regained the majesty that she should have had as a hall master of the Blood Dagger Gang. Aardwolf and Erju felt as if they'd been pardoned. They rolled and crawled away. As for the poison, they didn't dare to ask too much. They were afraid that if they asked too much, the young man would have an idea and kill them immediately. Die immediately or die in 7 days. It wasn't difficult to choose. One more day was one more day. Li Daochong glanced around coldly. At this time, the wilderness had returned to its former tranquility. A gust of wind blew and the grass rustled. Whoosh! Li Daochong's figure disappeared. Together with Princess Catherine, they turned into a ray of light in the sky, leaving behind more than 10 corpses with twisted faces under the tall grass. Li Daochong returned to the shuttle station. It only took a few minutes. Zhang Laogui had just picked up the scattered purple flame flowers and put them back into the flower basket. When he got up, Li Daochong had already returned with Princess Catherine. "Are you done?" Old Ghost Zhang asked simply. "Done." Li Daochong nodded slightly. He put one hand on Princess Catherine's shoulder and injected a stream of spiritual energy into the latter's body. Princess Catherine, who was limp all over, felt refreshed. Poof! She spat out a mouthful of black blood, and the poison disappeared. "Thank you, Master." Princess Catherine bowed respectfully. Her eyes were full of horror. Li Daochong's strength seemed to have increased a lot. She couldn't see through this young man anymore. How could there be such a terrifying guy in the world? Princess Catherine couldn't summon the slightest thought of resisting Li Daochong. She was as docile as a little white rabbit. She didn't have the temperament that a demon snake should have. "Let's go and see the houses." Li Daochong withdrew his hand and walked in the direction of Miscellaneous Treasures Street. The passers-by around didn't know what had happened. Where were the members of the Scorpion Gang who were in front of them just now? At the far corner of the street, a small figure hid behind a big tree and watched everything that happened near the station. It was the little girl selling flowers, Xiaoling River. "Little brother is an immortal," Xiaoling River murmured. She lowered her head and looked at the two spiritual stones in her hand. Then, she carefully put them into her pocket and turned to leave. Chapter 430. Miscellaneous Treasure Street was bustling with people. Most of the people who came here to search for treasures had the mentality of picking up scrap. The entire street was several kilometers long, but it was not a straight line, but an S-shaped, twisting and turning, with many branches extending out. The shops on both sides of the street were next to each other, and there were many stalls by the roadside. There were more than 100,000 registered shops and stalls. There were losses and profits in doing business. Those who could not maintain their business would naturally sell or rent the shop. Some posted information on the spirit net, while others left information on the billboards set up in Miscellaneous Treasure Street. Hundreds of shops were for sale every day, and even more were for rent. Li Daochong was not interested in renting. He only wanted to buy a shop with independent property rights, and it would be best if the area was bigger. After walking around for half a day and looking at more than 10 shops, Li Daochong did not take a fancy to any of them. It was either the area was too small, or the geographical location was too prosperous. Li Daochong's main purpose was not to do business, but to have a stronghold, just like the old mansion back in Blue Bay Star. Doing business was just a convenience, to give old Ghost Zhang something to do. The sky was getting dark, but Miscellaneous Treasure Street was still very lively. Because of Princess Catherine, Li Daochong and the other two would attract a lot of attention wherever they went. Li Daochong felt that this was rather inconvenient. This woman was too beautiful, and it was troublesome. It was easy for her to attract trouble. With Li Daochong's current strength, he was not afraid of anyone looking for trouble. If there really was someone looking for death, Li Daochong did not mind sending him on his way. However, this was a waste of time, and Li Daochong's expression was not very good. Princess Catherine seemed to have noticed that Li Daochong's mood was not right. She consciously took out a low-grade robe and put it on, covering her body and face. Only then did the restless gazes disappear. The one who led Li Daochong to look at the houses was a young woman with a rather pretty appearance. She was a mortal through and through. The young woman's name was Zhen Meili. She was a real estate agent in Miscellaneous Treasures Street. She was in charge of the business of shops, and made a living by taking intermediary fees. At first, Zhen Meili was quite enthusiastic. During this period of time, the turnover of the shops on Miscellaneous Treasure Street was very low. It was almost the end of the month, and she hadn't opened for business this month. Just as he was worrying about how to continue living, he saw this young man come over with an old man and a beautiful woman, asking if there were any shops. Looking at the young man's clothes, there was nothing special about them. They were all cheap goods, and did not even have a single dharma robe. They did not look like rich people. However, there were many times when one couldn't judge a book by its cover. Jean Meili had been in this line of work for 7 or 8 years, and had seen all kinds of people. Those who could open shops in miscellaneous Treasure Street were basically all cultivators or had the support of cultivators behind them. Mortals didn't have the ability to get their hands on magic treasures. The mortals here all made a living by working for cultivators or cultivation companies. Their status was very low. It was the same for Jean Meili. The boss of the Shangyuan agency she worked for was a foundation establishment stage cultivator. If you didn't have some skills, you definitely wouldn't be able to survive in miscellaneous Treasure Street. The starting price had to be at the foundation establishment stage. Otherwise, your peers would play with you until not even your bones were left. Therefore, when Jean Meili saw Li Daocheng's clothes, she did not look down on him. Instead, she secretly used the small magic treasure the boss gave her to secretly test this young man's cultivation level. As soon as she tested him, Jean Meili was greatly disappointed. He was actually just a refinement stage little guy. However, Jean Meili still maintained her enthusiasm because she noticed the other 2 people who came with the young man. An old man and a beautiful woman, a mere qi condensation cultivator, accompanied by 2 people like this was very thought-provoking. Looking at the behavior of the old man and the beautiful woman, they were very respectful to the young man. The combination of an old butler and a maid was the most common follower of a rich family's young master. Jean Meili's initial judgment was that the young man's family background must be good. She received him enthusiastically and introduced several shops with excellent geographical locations. But after looking at one shop after another, the young man still did not take a fancy to them. After looking at more than 10 shops, Jean Meili's legs were about to break, but this young man did not have the slightest intention of buying. This made Jean Meili a bit annoyed. "Brat, you didn't come here just to make fun of me, right?" The more Jean Meili thought about it, the more she felt that something was wrong. Recently, business was not good. In addition to some objective factors, the main reason was that a new intermediary opened in miscellaneous Treasure Street and took away all the business. It was said that the intermediary had an underworld background. Even the boss, who had always been strong, did not say a word and pretended that he did not see it. This new intermediary only opened for 3 months, but it had already squeezed out 5 other intermediaries. Jean Meili's Shangyuan intermediary continued to operate because the boss had some connections. But it was still very exaggerated to squeeze out 5 intermediaries in such a short period of time. Jean Meili did not understand at first. A few days ago, she heard that the new intermediary would use despicable means to squeeze out its peers. For example, it hired fake customers to fool other intermediaries, found gangsters to make trouble, and even hired powerful thugs to beat up the boss. The more Jean Meili thought about it, the more she felt that something was wrong. These 3 guys were not sent by the new intermediary to play with her, right? Seeing that the sky was getting dark, Jean Meili started to worry about her safety, so she sent a long-distance message to her boss. "Nuanyu, I'm about to get off work. The client is still looking at the shop on the old street. Where are you?" She received a reply very quickly. "I'm nearby. Take them to see the shop that has been empty for 3 years. I'll be there right away." Seeing the message, Jean Meili's heart skipped a beat. "Nuanyu, that shop is very strange. No matter who buys or rents it, they will definitely meet with an unexpected death within 3 months. The previous few landlords all died unnatural death. The security bureau came to investigate, but they didn't find anything. The few merchants next to the shop have all moved away. It's not very good to take the client to see the shop. The economy is bad now. I can't care so much. Didn't you say that the client is not a local?" "Indeed, he's not a local." "Then that's enough. Take them there. I'll be there right away." "Okay." After Zhen Meili quickly sent the message to her boss, Lin Nuanyu, she brought Li Daochong and the other two to the side streets of Miscellaneous Treasure Street. The number of people on this street immediately decreased. There were very few pedestrians on the street, and many of the shops on both sides had closed early. The shops that were open were very quiet, and very few people were interested in them. However, Li Daochong's eyes lit up. The environment here was quite ideal. Old Ghost Zhang had a bitter expression. He had high hopes for the few shops in front, and the flow of people was quite good. However, Li Daochong didn't like them. Old Ghost Zhang was just a follower, and he wasn't the one paying for them. Naturally, he didn't have the right to speak and could only continue to follow. After entering this street, Old Ghost Zhang had a look of disdain. Could a shop be opened here? There was no one at this time. Wouldn't it be a ghost street during the day? Old Ghost Zhang really didn't expect that there would be such a place in a big city like North Star City. The feng shui here was too bad. The further they went into the middle of the street, the less people there were. Be it the pedestrians or the shops, they all seemed to be avoiding something. Old Ghost Zhang acutely sensed that something wasn't right. This street wasn't considered long, only a few hundred meters in length. Although it was quiet, there were still some people. However, these people were mainly concentrated in the front and back street. The strange thing was that there wasn't a single person in the middle of the street. The shops on both sides of the street were tightly shut, and a few of them had advertising slogans pasted on their doors. Even the street lamps had turned dim. Old Ghost Zhang had mainly captured some low-level dark ghosts to sell over the years, so he was very sensitive to changes in the environment. When they got close to these few shops, Old Ghost Zhang clearly sensed a slight change in the temperature. Although it wasn't very obvious, he was sure that the temperature had dropped. Old Ghost Zhang took out a compass from his sleeve and took a look. The yin-yang needle on the compass didn't show any abnormal movement. Strange. Old Ghost Zhang asked softly, feeling suspicious. Zhen Meili brought Li Daochong and the other two to a shop in the middle of this street. There was a very eye-catching sign hanging on the door, with 16 large words written on it. Chapter 431. The atmosphere of this street was completely different from the outside. In fact, it was only a few hundred meters away, but the difference was like heaven and earth. Outside, there was a surging tide of people and flowers, but there was no one here. If they didn't know that this was a branch of Miscellaneous Treasure Street and directly entered here, they would think that it was some corner. Li Daochong's spiritual sense had already probed a few empty shops around, but he didn't find anything special, nor was there any death aura. He could confirm that there were no ghosts of the Hades here, but the strange thing was that the environment here seemed to be caused by some dirty things. Zhen Meili suddenly shuddered, and her body couldn't help but tremble slightly. She didn't want to come to this damned place at all. As long as you stayed on Miscellaneous Treasure Street for a while, no one was willing to come here. This street had been forgotten a few years ago and became a forbidden area of Miscellaneous Treasure Street. Everyone called this place Curse Street. At first, they thought it was haunted, but the Security Bureau came to investigate and invited many cultivators from Jindan and Yuanying. But no matter how they investigated, they couldn't find any problems. But as long as they stayed here, they would definitely go insane and die within 3 months. At night, they would also hear the cries of women and children. Many cultivators from North Star City came here to explore, and some curious cultivators came together and lived next door. When they heard the cries of women and children at night, they immediately rushed in. Strangely, they didn't find anything. They turned the shop upside down, but there was nothing. There were also cultivators who set up mysterious ghost-catching spiritual formations, but they also found nothing. Even the military sent people to investigate. For 3 months, the troops were stationed here. They used all kinds of the most advanced detection magic weapons, and even used precious space magic weapons. Still, they didn't find anything. After 2 to 3 years of investigation, many people finally came to the conclusion that there were no ghosts of the Hades here. After the results came out, people thought that the sudden deaths of the previous landlords should just be a coincidence, and had nothing to do with this shop. So, someone bought the shop, and it was a cultivator foundation establishment stage. As a result, this cultivator stayed for 3 months. On a moonless night, he went crazy while cultivating and died suddenly. His death was miserable, and his expression was ferocious. It was as if he had seen something extremely terrifying before he died, and his appearance showed obvious signs of aging. After that, a few more landlords moved in. Without exception, all of them died within 3 months, but the reasons for their deaths were different. There were also some who didn't die in the shop, some who were killed on the street, some who were killed by boulders that suddenly fell from the mountains, and some who died on top of women's bellies. However, all of them had 2 things in common after they died. First, they had an expression of extreme fear, as if they had seen the most terrifying thing in their lives. The other was that they would show obvious signs of aging. Although they were not senile, they would be much older than before, and their hair would also turn white. No matter how hard they tried, no one was able to find out the cause of the fire in this shop. However, people continued to die suddenly. The only survivor was the last landlord of this shop, a late Jean Dan cultivator. Although he had survived, the Jean Dan cultivator had lost half his life. This Jean Dan cultivator's background wasn't small. He was the vice dean of the North Star University's cultivation department, Huang Ruo. In fact, the person who bought this shop wasn't Huang Ruo. Instead, it was the North Star University's cultivation department's research lab. Because of the strangeness of this shop, it attracted the interest of the North Star University's cultivation department's research lab. They wanted to research the cause of these strange occurrences. The research lab believed that there might be some kind of unknown psychokinesis field here. It was a field that current cultivation technology had yet to reach. If they could research it, it was very likely that the Shenghua Federation's cultivation technology would improve by leaps and bounds. But the vice dean, Huang Ruo? Not long after she brought her team here, there wasn't much progress in the research, but strange occurrences kept happening. For example, their research equipment would move for no reason, but there was nothing on the spirit light surveillance. After that, everyone started having problems with their cultivation. Huang Ruo? Once, she heard a woman crying. She went into the room where the sound came from. After entering, she didn't find anything. When she started cultivating the next day, she almost went crazy and even had hallucinations. The entire team hurriedly packed their bags in panic and left this damned place. This was the only time that no one had died after moving in. Huang Ruo? She only fully recovered after half a year of recuperation. Since then, the shop had been empty. 3 years had passed, and no one had cared about it. This place was known as the first of the 3 ghost places on planet North Star. The other 2 ghost places had been found out over the past few years. They were no longer ghost places. This place had become the only ghost place with unknown causes. The unexplainable strange occurrences made the surrounding merchants leave one after another. People called this place the Cursed Place. However, all the strange occurrences were limited to this shop. Although the neighboring shops were now empty, nothing strange had happened when people lived here before. Introducing such a strange shop to a customer, Zhen Meili felt a little apprehensive. If they knew the history of this shop, it would be strange if they didn't beat her up. Zhen Meili stood at the door of the shop and briefly introduced the shop to Li Daochong and the other 2, but she didn't bring them in. Zhen Meili kept looking around throughout the process. There was some anxiety in her eyes. She wouldn't enter this shop, let alone bring anyone in. If something really happened, they would fight her to the death. This was a scam. Zhen Meili just wanted to leave this place as soon as possible and let her boss, Lin Nuanyu, take over. Miss Zhen, don't just talk. Bring us in to take a look. Old Ghost Zhang was interested in the shop and urged. Master, please don't be impatient. I don't have the key. Later, our boss will personally show you around. Zhen Meili was already prepared. She actually knew where the key was, but she would never bring anyone in. She didn't want to go in either. Li Daochong wasn't in a hurry. His divine senses had already scanned the shop. Other than sensing a very slight fluctuation of telekinesis, there was nothing wrong. After a while, a petite woman wearing a red robe walked over from the back street. When Zhen Meili saw her, her expression softened. She immediately introduced her to Li Daochong and the other two. That's our boss, Lin Nuanyu. Boss Lin will show you around the shop. It's time for me to get off work, so I'll take my leave first. As she spoke, Zhen Meili greeted the woman in red and left in a hurry. Her footsteps were lighter as she walked, as if she was relieved. You're Mr. Li, the one who wants to buy a shop? Lin Nuanyu asked. Yes. Li Daochong nodded. All right then, follow me in to take a look. If you think it's not bad, we can discuss the price. This shop is the largest among the dozens of resale shops I have. As Lin Nuanyu spoke, she waved her hand gently. A dusty step in front of the shop was lifted up, revealing a shiny silver key. Lin Nuanyu withdrew her hand and the key flew into her hand. This move made Li Daochong's eyes light up. This woman's cultivation wasn't low, and her cultivation method was also top grade. The metropolis was a metropolis, after all. Any small boss of a real estate agency was a cultivator in the middle stage of the foundation establishment stage. In Blue Bay Star, they would be considered big shots. Here, however, they could only make a living at the bottom. When Lin Nuanyu used the key to open the door, her expression was clearly nervous. Her movements weren't very smooth, and she seemed to be hesitating. This detail naturally didn't escape Li Daochong's eyes, which had a hint of electricity in them. Old Ghost Zhang and concubine Sei also noticed Lin Nuanyu's actions. The two of them exchanged a glance, and a sense of wariness rose in their hearts. If it weren't for the fact that business wasn't doing well recently and she couldn't pay off her loan, Lin Nuanyu wouldn't have brought people to look at this shop. But she didn't have many resources on hand. She said that she had the resources of dozens of shops, but it was a big exaggeration. Since last week, she only had the rights to transfer a dozen shops. The rest had been snatched away by the new real estate agency. Lin Nuanyu was able to cultivate to the middle stage of the foundation establishment stage, and all the expenses were earned by herself. But when she reached the foundation establishment stage, the expenses were too high. Even if Lin Nuanyu was very good at earning money, she couldn't afford to support herself. Last year, when she tried to break through to the middle stage of the foundation establishment stage, the amount of cultivation resources she needed increased sharply. Lin Nuanyu calculated the amount of money she had, and it was far from enough. But she was about to break through, and if she missed it, she might miss the best time to break through. The only way to raise such a large amount of money in a short period of time was to take a loan. Lin Nuanyu didn't want to miss the opportunity, so she went all out and took a loan of 1.5 million beginner spirit stones from the loan company. In addition to her savings of a few 100,000 beginner spirit stones, she finally bought the resources she needed and finally succeeded in breaking through. As an individual cultivator, reaching the middle stage of the foundation establishment stage at the age of 25 was already quite difficult if she wasn't extremely talented. Lin Nuanyu also earned quite a bit every month. Adding everything together, she earned tens of millions of Federation dollars a month, which was equivalent to tens of thousands of beginner spirit stones. Her repayment period was 10 years. She had to pay back 200,000 beginner spirit stones a year with interest. Although the pressure was great, she could still afford it. But in the past 2 to 3 months, because of the new real estate agency, Lin Nuanyu's monthly income had greatly decreased. She had already missed her repayment limit for 2 months. If she defaulted this month, it would be 3 months in a row. The loan company had already warned Lin Nuanyu that if she defaulted again, someone would come knocking on her door. Lin Nuanyu was in a difficult situation now. If not, she wouldn't have taken the risk of being cursed to bring people to look at this shop. Zhen Meili had already said that the real estate agency had looked at all the shops in her hands and wasn't satisfied with them. This was the last one. Zhen Meili also told Lin Nuanyu about her worries. She was worried that they were people sent by the new real estate agency to cause trouble. Lin Nuanyu thought that if they were here to cause trouble, they would definitely know about the glorious history of this shop. They wouldn't dare to enter even if they were given 100 guts. If they followed her in, she could be sure that they weren't here to cause trouble but were real customers. It was just that they were new here and didn't know much about this shop. There was no harm in trying to promote it. Lin Nuanyu didn't want to miss any opportunity to make money. Although the price of this shop wasn't high, the commission was very high. She could get 40% of the commission. Lin Nuanyu's slight hesitation was noticed by Li Daochong and the other two. They looked at each other and followed her into the shop. After entering, Lin Nuanyu turned on the lights. As expected, the walls weren't covered in dust. Instead, it was very clean. Li Daochong and the other two didn't feel much, but Lin Nuanyu's hair stood on end. No one had entered this shop for 3 years. After the researchers from North Star University left, it had been empty. No one had entered for 3 years. The interior walls were brand new and spotless. The counters, tables, and chairs looked like they were used every day. There wasn't a speck of dust. Chapter 432. If Lin Nuanyu was just an ordinary girl, she would have collapsed to the ground after seeing the scene in the shop. She might even have fainted. Fortunately, she wasn't. Although she felt a chill down her spine, she didn't expose herself because of her deep cultivation. Princess Catherine looked at the tables and chairs with shining eyes and sent a message to Li Daochong silently. Master, the tables and chairs here are all made from 1,000-year-old sapphire rosewood. A single chair is worth at least 100,000 elementary spirit stones. Sapphire rosewood is one of the best raw materials for high-grade talisman paper. Hearing the message, Li Daochong's eyes moved. He didn't know much about spirit wood. If it wasn't for Princess Catherine, he wouldn't have known that these tables and chairs were so valuable and could be used to make high-level talisman paper. Li Daochong was tempted. After settling down, the first thing he wanted to do was to make level 12 talismans. The shop had 2 rooms, one inside and one outside. After entering, there was a large courtyard that was more than 300 square meters. There were flowers and trees, a small bridge over flowing water, and a unique pavilion in the middle. There were houses on all sides of the courtyard. It was like a large courtyard house. The size of each house was not small. The exterior was antique, but the interior was more modern. It had everything that should be there. Mr. Li, this place is not bad. It's a bit out of the way, but the spiritual qi here is gloomy with a bit of cold qi. At first, I thought it was a faint death qi, but when I came in, I realized it was cold spiritual qi. Old Ghost Zhang transmitted his voice. Li Daochong nodded slightly. He also realized this. This place felt like the exit of some special spirit mine. However, Li Daochong didn't find any spirit mine fluctuations even after probing thousands of meters underground. Other than the hints from Princess Catherine and Old Man Zhang, Li Daochong also discovered something. The soil in the courtyard was a rare spirit soil that could be used to grow spirit herbs. Lin Nuanyu opened the door to a room at the back of the courtyard and said hurriedly. Before Li Daochong and the other two could see what was going on inside, Lin Nuanyu was about to close the door and bring Li Daochong to the next room. At first, Li Daochong did not pay much attention to it. However, a vortex suddenly appeared in the depths of his sea of consciousness. It was as if the blood-boiling upgrader had been activated. The Demon King's lingering thoughts detected. Li Daochong was shocked. Demon King? Hades were divided into three types. The first type was the most commonly seen dark ghost. Most of them existed in the form of ghosts, which were the ghosts that often appeared among the common folk. They were also called specters. The second type had flesh and blood and possessed the dark body. Their numbers were greatly reduced, but they were much more powerful than the dark ghosts. They were the nobles of the Hades, and even the weakest among them was as strong as an early-stage Yuanian cultivator. The more powerful ones were even stronger than soul formation cultivators. The third type was the royal family of the Hades. They were the true ruling class of the Hades. It could be said that all the movements and actions of the Hades were under their control. They were the gods of the Hades. To be more precise, the Hades were gods that did not exist. They were demons that stood on the opposite side of the god. Humans usually called them devils, demons, or evil spirit. Devils were the ultimate product of the Hades. In ancient times, they were called Yama Demon Kings, or Yama Kings for short. They had a devil body and could transform into anything. The weakest devil was comparable to a void refinement cultivator, who was above the soul formation cultivator. Demon Kings were even more terrifying beings. They were even more powerful than the combination Immortal Lords and could compete with Tribulation Transcendence Immortals. The Demon King level was something that Li Daochong could not imagine. It was the highest being in the Hades. It was like the Tribulation Transcendence Immortals among the cultivators. They had reached the peak of this world. They could crush stars into powder with a single thought. How terrifying was that? The moment the hot-blooded upgrader sounded, the spirit chi in Li Daochong's body surged and he almost went berserk. His hair stood on end as if he was facing a great enemy. Even if it was just the lingering thoughts of the Demon King, it was enough to wipe out everything below Yuanying. The lingering thoughts have been left behind for more than 10,000 years. There are no longer any spiritual imprints. It is only a magnetic field that exists in the flow of time. The notification sounded again. Li Daochong's stiff body finally relaxed. If it were not for the notification, he would have rushed into the room and used the Eye of Thunder punishment to destroy the lingering thoughts. In fact, Li Daochong did not sense any abnormalities. The lingering thoughts of the Demon King were far beyond Li Daochong's current ability. Even a soul formation cultivator would not be able to sense any abnormalities, let alone Li Daochong. Even if the Shenghua Federation used the power of the country, it would be futile. It was impossible to sense the lingering thoughts that had merged into the flow of time without the strength of a divine sense at the unification stage. This was also the reason why so many strange things had happened here so many years ago, and why they could not find the reason even after using so much power. Of course, Li Daochong was not clear about the past of this shop. The reason Li Daochong was able to discover it was all thanks to the hot-blooded upgrader. Li Daochong's emotions gradually calmed down. Although this lingering thoughts was strong, it did not seem to be aggressive at the moment. It only existed naturally in the flow of time in this space. Li Daochong's emotional fluctuations were not noticed by others, but his slight pause still made Lin Nuanyuan's heart tighten. Lin Nuanyu did not see any clues. She was just worried that this young man with a low cultivation level would not like this place. How much does it cost to buy this shop? Just as Lin Nuanyuan was feeling nervous, Li Daochong's calm voice rang out. Lin Nuanyuan's eyes lit up and she quickly said, "Mr. Li, this shop has an elegant environment and it's huge. It's a rare place to stay in a busy city. The price is also very fair. The announced price is 15 million beginner spirit stones. If you can pay in one go, you can get a 20% discount. It'll be 12 million beginner spirit stones." When Lin Nuanyuan reported the price, Princess Catherine and Old Man Zhang were still secretly shocked. 12 million beginner spirit stones was a huge sum for anyone below Jean Dan. Although this price was very generous and could even be said to be cheap based on the terrain, size, and decorations in the shop, it was still a huge number for Princess Catherine and Old Man Zhang. It was like an entire courtyard house in Beijing's second and third ring road that was worth hundreds of millions and had a complete set of mahogany furniture. If it was sold for 12 million, would you want it? After Lin Nuanyuan finished speaking, she tried her best to control her emotions. She nervously looked at Li Daochong's lip. I want this shop. I'll pay in one go. However, I'll complete the transfer procedures today. Li Daochong immediately said. Lin Nuanyu was stunned for a moment. She looked at Li Daochong in a daze. She didn't expect him to be so straightforward. 12 million beginner spirit stones was a huge sum. Lin Nuanyu found it hard to imagine that this ordinary-looking young man in front of her would be able to take out such a huge sum in one go. What's wrong? Is it inconvenient? Li Daochong saw that Lin Nuanyu didn't say anything, so he frowned and asked. No, it's convenient. Of course it's convenient. Our new moon intermediary's motto is to do everything possible to satisfy our customers' needs. Our customers don't have to worry, rest assured, and be at ease. Lin Nuanyu hurriedly said. She reflexively said all the slogans that she usually used. She couldn't care less now. Li Daochong had 300,000 medium-grade spirit stones on him. One medium-grade spirit stone could be exchanged for 100 beginner spirit stones. 12 million beginner spirit stones was equivalent to 120,000 medium-grade spirit stones. Li Daochong directly transferred the 120,000 medium-grade spirit stones into a palm-sized storage bag and handed it to Lin Nuanyu. Lin Nuanyu took the storage bag and checked it with her psychic power. She gasped. This guy actually paid with medium-grade spirit stones. In terms of actual value, 120,000 medium-grade spirit stones was more than 12 million beginner spirit stones. Good heavens! She couldn't tell that this guy was a tycoon. Lin Nuanyu tightly held onto the storage bag with 120,000 medium-grade spirit stones, unwilling to let go. Once the transaction was completed, 40% of it would be her commission. Lin Nuanyu had worked as an intermediary for so many years in miscellaneous Treasure Street, but she had never received such a high commission. Normally, when a shop was sold, the commission would only be about 3% to 4%, and no more than 7% to 8%. If this shop could give 40% commission, it really couldn't be sold. Lin Nuanyu immediately said, Mr. Li, please wait a moment. I'll contact the landlord right away. Lin Nuanyu immediately turned and ran to the side to talk to Huang Ruo. She contacted Huang Ruo. While waiting for the call to connect, Lin Nuanyu was burning with anxiety. She was afraid that Huang Ruo was too busy to receive this telepathic message. A few seconds later, when Huang Ruo's voice sounded, Lin Nuanyu felt relieved. Someone wants to buy that shop? Are you sure? Huang Ruo exclaimed after hearing the news. Lin Nuanyu's mind buzzed and she felt dizzy. Huang Ruo? Huang Ruo was a late-stage Jin Dan cultivator and a psychic cultivator. There was a strong vibration in his voice. Professor Huang, it's absolutely true. He gave me the money. The other party only has one request, and that is to transfer the ownership today. If it's not possible, he won't buy it. Lin Nuanyu didn't care about her dizziness and exaggerated. The other party was silent. A few seconds later, Huang Ruo's voice sounded again. Okay, I'll be right there. Then, Lin Nuanyu brought Li Daochong and the other two out of the shop. When they returned to New Moon Intermediary, Lin Nuanyu served them tea and peeled spirit fruit. She was very enthusiastic about Li Daochong and the other two. About 20 minutes later, a woman in a yellow robe entered New Moon Intermediary. Naturally, it was Huang Ruo? Yes. When she saw that the buyer of the shop was a young man who looked to be at most 20 years old, she was really shocked. The transfer process wasn't complicated. As long as the buyer and seller entered the spiritual internet to change the owner's identity, the wristwatch would automatically generate a property spirit card. After the original spirit card was approved by the original owner, it would be cancelled. In less than 10 minutes, the transfer was completed. The owner of the shop was officially Li Daochong. After everything was done, Li Daochong and the other two left New Moon Intermediary and went straight to the shop. Looking at Li Daochong's back, Huang Ruo felt a little guilty. She felt a little guilty. Originally, she wanted to tell the buyer about the shop. But Huang Ruo? Her curiosity about the shop got the better of her, and she didn't dare to live there anymore. Huang Ruo. As an associate professor in the field of psychology, he was obsessed with academic research. She wasn't willing to give up any opportunity to do research. 3 years had passed, but she had never forgotten about that strange shop. She originally thought that the shop would be abandoned forever. She didn't expect that it would be sold and that someone would want to live there. A ready-made lab rat was sent to her door. It would be a pity if she didn't seize the opportunity to study it. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.